Hi, welcome, good morning. Thank you for joining us. I have a speech that I had prepared, but I want to put it aside because this morning, speaking with everybody here, I was just so blown away by the commitment, the motivation, how everybody is so involved with Goodwill and with Google in terms of trying to help people improve their lives, find new jobs, and get into the new era, the new future of work, which is really amazing. I started out speaking with Goodwill, wrote an article for Forbes, and to be fair, I really wasn't too aware of Goodwill. They asked, "Hey, would you like to write something about it?" I said, "Sure." I kind of thought they were, and Steve, I can't see you here, but don't get mad at me for saying this, but I thought it was kind of like Salvation Army. I wasn't really sure what they did. I kind of heard of like a thrift shop thing going on. But then when I started looking into it, I realized, wow, this is so much more, that you offer all these skills, all this coursework, all this training. We're especially helping underserved people, people who've been overlooked, people who may not have the chance to go to college, people who didn't have the skills and kind of stuck. And the world has changed so much. Whether we like it or not, is we're in a digital age now. And if you don't have the skills, you don't have the background, you just fall behind. And I was blown away at how Goodwill, along with Google, were putting together all this coursework where people can kind of learn, they could develop their skills, they could get jobs, and good paying jobs, and also just get their foot in the door, which is amazing. Because before, it was just impossible. Like, how can you get, if let's say you don't have a high school diploma, if let's say you're in a certain area that you just don't have any connections to find a good job, you're stuck. You're stuck in this cycle. And as everything grows and technology becomes more important, you get further and further behind. So all of a sudden, it's a great equalizer. So between the courses, the training, the coaching, the mentoring, the alliance between Google, Goodwill, Accenture, hundreds of other companies, it's going to make a huge difference in the lives of the people. And what I love as I started out, the people I was interacting with today, you could tell like they love this mission, that they feel they're helping people, they're changing lives. And this is fantastic to see. So I'm so honored and glad to kick off this event, because it's so meaningful and so powerful, and it's going to change so many lives for the better. And I appreciate the people who work for Goodwill, for Google, all the companies helping out, for people who are coming here to amplify the mission. And in particular, I'd like to introduce somebody, a success story, because you hear about people being helped, people finding jobs, but sometimes you need to see somebody and really get a feel for the difference it makes. So I'd like to introduce Kara Israel Gooch, who started out in the program. She was a single mom at the time, had 3 young children, worked hard, persevered, was able to get a certificate, get an apprenticeship, started working at Accenture, and all of a sudden, her life has changed. So I'd like to bring out Kara, and I believe we can have a short little video to see her success story. Thank you.
I am Kara Israel. Okay. Got twins. Skylar is 4, so that's the one that's running around right now. And then the twins, they're 8. Prior to being introduced to Goodwill, I was in digital marketing. I was asked numerous times if I had some experience with building websites or any other areas of tech. And I'd always answer no. And after a while, I kind of took it upon myself to try and flip that answer on its head and try and get a yes out of that. When the IT support certification came about, it was quite perfect. Honestly, it gave me everything that I needed to get that step into tech. I came in with just a high school diploma, and I graduated, and the next day I got a call from Miss Becky, and she said, "I have an opportunity for you with Accenture."
So the apprenticeship program that we are using as one of our primary sources of talent focuses on going after military veteran programs, technology boot camps, community colleges, and just companies like Goodwill, where we can invest heavily on upskilling people and their technical skills in very niche and very relevant ecosystems and solutions that we can use for servicing our clients.
Because of the relationships that Goodwill has with their partners, it gave me that avenue that I needed that's like no other. I'm working from home. My equipment was sent to me. I honestly don't think I would have been presented the opportunity to even be an apprentice without graduation of this program. It set me up in a way that I couldn't buy, honestly. It feels good to be working my dream job. My goodness. All right, so quick question for you. Did you know 2 truths can exist within the same situation at the same time? My truths: success requires hard work, and success can be attained while lacking a 4-year degree. September 2017. 4 one-way train tickets in hand. 3 for 3 small girls that call me mom, and 1 for me, their mom. You typically hear stories of young people ready to hit the big city of Hollywood, where the streets are paved with gold. But being born and raised there, I was happy to be leaving on that midnight train 4 hours north of Georgia to a simpler place in time, Music City. We arrived. I set on my newfound interest of breaking into tech. Somehow, some way, I was going to be an overnight tech sensation. Yeah. Hey Siri, search how to break into tech. Must have 4-year degree, must have 5 years coding experience, must know SQL, Python, Java. Must find tissues for my tears in another dream. How was I going to consider going to school with 6-year-old twins, 2-year-old toddler at the time, and no financial support for babysitters while I was possibly going to night school classes? I was juggling a remote marketing job at the time and a data entry position that simply scoffed at the idea of me joining their IT department. But that was until a coworker introduced me to a program that was featured in the Tennessean, led by Google, sponsored by Goodwill, that offered working adults a chance at a career certification. I was finally on my way, right? But Goodwill welcomed me. They allowed my children to come to our monthly meetings. And like I said, I was finally on my way. I graduated from the program, and it was an amazing feeling. And they called with an incredible opportunity. Accenture. They wanted me to join their Earn and Learn apprenticeship program that was started out of their Nashville office. But that's a huge company. So here comes imposter syndrome, right? I'm like, don't they know that I'm only a single mom with no 4-year degree? Don't they know that I only have a certificate in IT support? A certificate, something that could be paid for quite simply. Don't they already know that? Yeah, and you don't need that to qualify. And at the time, it was 2020. So that may have been a pause for the rest of the world, but my world was skipping to the beat of a new song. It's then July 2021. I'm then a graduate of the apprenticeship program with the heightened ability to do incredible things. I've been introduced to game changers
in countless industries, been introduced to employee resource groups that help me thrive, and leaders that foster that leader in me. I've since been a robotics process automation developer, a tester in the SAP business group, and now, as I stand here, an apprentice ambassador, shedding light on a program that absolutely changed my life. Accenture is happily on the front lines of creating and being that change this year by reserving 20% of their entry-level opportunities for apprentices like me, and you can do the same. I've not only successfully referred people and added to that year-end tally. 4 of them were candidates, but now they're my coworkers, one of which is my absolutely amazing husband, William. And so as I climb, I aim to perfect my brand as not only a change maker, as a motivator, but mostly as a leader, to show, thankfully, the seated audiences, but also our digital audiences, that guess what? You can too. But my message to my 3 small girls that still call me mom, 2 truths can always be true at the same time, in the same place. Thank you.
And I'm the author of The Lost Art of Connecting. I've had the privilege the last couple of years, as well as the enormously tremendous opportunity for my firm to work with an organization that is very integral in this space, let us called New Profit. And it helped me really understand the truly, truly vital importance of the meaning of a job, and what we all can be doing to help with job creation, with upskilling, with enabling opportunities for everyone in this country. So we're going to dive in about that in the next 45 minutes. We know millions of Americans are hitting reset for themselves and their careers, while some are seizing economic mobility opportunities created by labor market shifts during COVID. Too many have been excluded. What we're going to dive into in the next 45 minutes specifically is how public and private partnerships, such as those between Google and Goodwill, can lead to lasting positive change. We'll also gain a better understanding of this unique, successful partnership and the impact it has had and continues to have. So before I turn it over and start asking these gentlemen questions, I want to introduce you. I don't know if all of you know them, but their bios were like as long as the 45 minutes that we have on stage, so I took the liberty to shorten them just a bit, and I hope that is acceptable. I always say when somebody introduces me and after the 3rd paragraph, I'm like, you're just adding years to my life, so I don't need to hear the whole thing. Kent Walker is the President of Global Affairs and Chief Legal Officer at Google and Alphabet, where he oversees the teams responsible for legal matters, government affairs, and philanthropy. And for nearly 30 years, Kent has focused on the intersection of technology, law, and policy. Kent graduated from honors at Harvard and Stanford Law School. And Steve Preston, is the president and CEO of Goodwill Industries International. And just a side note, Goodwill serves more than 1 million people each year through their network of local Goodwill organizations and employs more than 125,000 and is one of North America's leaders in workforce training, development, job placement, and other services. And I was telling Kent early this morning, as a child growing up in the 60s and 70s, my two nonprofits that are still seared in my mind is UNICEF, because of the, when I would go trick-or-treating, and I'm a Halloween baby, so I, of course, remember that. But also Goodwill, because they were in all the neighborhoods that I traversed. And so it just has a special meaning to me, and I would imagine to many of you. But Steve has served in numerous operational and financial leadership positions in both public and private sectors, and graduated with honors from Northwestern University and holds an MBA from the University of Chicago. So that's enough with their bios. We have an impressive audience, okay? The people in the room, just in case you're curious, are representatives from the White House, cabinet agencies, leading nonprofits, and major corporations. So what I would love to open up is ask both of you for, a few minutes to explain, why are you here? What are your opening thoughts about what's going to happen the next several hours? I know, we're going to go through this. Kent.
So let me start off with a story that I heard from Larry Summers a few years ago. We were at a dinner, somebody asked Summers, well, we're in the middle of an economic turndown right now. We're seeing significant unemployment. Is this a crisis or is this business as usual? And Summers said, both. People said, what? And what people forget, said Summers, is that the American economy loses 6 million jobs pretty much every year. But it creates 6.5 million jobs every year. And the magic is creating a fluid labor market that allows people to move across the old jobs into the new jobs. And that, for us, was inspiring, this notion of trying to make labor markets work better. And it's never been more important than in a fast-moving digital economy. So we are trying to move forward, both on two different fronts. One, to create ladders, the kind of skilling programs we're going to be talking about here today, but also to reduce friction, to try and avoid things like unnecessary college degree requirements that are holding people back and keep that labor market from working as fluidly as we need it to for our economy and for our society. So when we partner on the first one, let's talk about building ladders or creating ladders. When we first started working with Goodwill in 2017, that was because we recognized that Goodwill was an amazing job creation engine. People don't recognize that it places more people in jobs than any other nonprofit in the United States.
Wow.
So we needed to go beyond and work with them on not just the giving of training, but the creating of new skills, the wraparound skills that make it likely that people who are getting this job training will actually succeed. That's about meeting learners where they are. It's the stuff that everyone in this room knows, that the kinds of training that you need is important and it needs to be relevant, but you also need to have things like transportation and childcare and coaching to make people feel as though they can succeed. The way Kara's story illustrates so well. Her remarkable grit and determination, coupled with those sorts of resources, were really what were necessary to make that story work well for her and for so many others. The faster the world moves, the more important this becomes. The more important it is we have these flexible labor markets. Technology's done amazing things. In the last few decades, it's created new access to information. It has brought 1 billion people out of poverty around the world. It has increased our lifespans. But it also has brought new challenges. And we need to figure out how to make sure that we're working smoothly to adjust to that and go forward. Because the world is increasingly divided between jobs that demand digital skills and those that don't. And the pool of ones that don't is drying up fast. The World Economic Forum says that half of new jobs in the next decade are going to need new skills to continue to be competitive. So increasingly, we're involving the upskilling that we're giving to keep pace with the new demands of new careers. And that's where programs like ours come in. We can connect more Americans with more in-demand digital skills. How do we do that? 3 areas of focus. 1, technology. 2nd, training. And 3rd, hiring. So first, tools and platforms that help people develop skills. Things like the fact that half of all job searches in the United States start out on Google.
Wow.
That's why we created Google Job Search, to help people find the jobs they need. If you're looking for plumbing jobs, you put in plumbing jobs near me and you will see an ordered list of what jobs are out there, what are the requirements, what do they pay, how far away are they. Second, we want to bring skills and training programs to more people in more places across the country. That's why, as Google.org, we started teaming up with Steve and his team at Goodwill in 2017 to expand our reach. And that's why we launched the Grow with Google program and the Google Career Certificates program. That's providing job training in fields like project management and data analytics and IT support. So far, we've provided over 100,000 need-based scholarships. Those are to people across the country in geographies, not just on the coast, but in every state where we can have outreach. Many of them from underrepresented groups. And we've just announced 500 scholarships for every small business in the country who wants to upskill their people. We've already had 70,000 graduates from that program. 75% of them report a positive career impact. That's a job or a raise or a promotion. And we recently announced, working with several of you in the room, $100 million that we're putting toward Google Career Certificates Fund, which will allow a wraparound loan program that allows tens of thousands of more American workers to qualify for the wraparound skills, to get the wraparound skills they need to complete these training programs. And we hope that's going to unlock $1 billion in wage gains that otherwise wouldn't have happened. So third, we need to have partnerships that broaden the equity, broaden the opportunity in hiring. So in the UK and the US, we've started building a training and apprenticeship program for all Google Career Certificates. And already we have hundreds of apprentices signed up for that. So that's the ladders part. That's how you give people the additional skills they need. But what about reducing friction? Because that's key to the growth of a digital economy and to the fluid labor market we were talking about. So one key barrier right now is the requirement for a college degree for jobs that don't necessarily require a college degree. Mm-hmm. And as you heard earlier, that's a real challenge when 2/3 of Americans don't have a college degree.
Or they can't afford a college
Or can't afford a college degree, exactly. So unless we change that, jobs tomorrow are going to just stay out of reach. So, and moreover, those degree requirements particularly hit people from diverse racial groups and geographic groups. That's 70% of rural workers, almost 70% of African American workers, more than 80% of Hispanic workers don't have college degrees. Now, the programs I mentioned before will help people move beyond some of these requirements, but we need broad-based efforts by governments, by a private sector, by nonprofits to redefine what it means to be qualified for work. And the good news is that governments are starting to take note of this. Governor Lamont up in Connecticut has actually written to all the different states saying, wait a second, revise your own requirements. Double check, do you really need a college degree for some of these jobs? We have in our programs over 150 employers. That's from Walmart to Smucker's Jam, saying they are going to take Google's career certificates in lieu of college degrees for many of their jobs as they consider their next hires. And that makes for a more diversely educated workforce. We've partnered with Ford up in Michigan, on Michigan Central, bringing together efforts to try and revitalize the automotive sector. We're going to hear later on, I think, Byron Auguste, the CEO of Opportunity at Work. We're working at Google with a program called, a company called Everyday Robots. We have some of their graduates and some of their, what they call stars, people skilled through alternative routes, working on jobs like robot operator, a job that we wouldn't have imagined a generation ago. It's still early, but the model is showing great progress. How do we bring people from diverse backgrounds into the tech industry? So that's an awful lot to start with. We're off to a good start, but we're really excited to learn from today's conversation. Steve,
I just want to get your talking points afterwards so I can put them right into my next speech.
There you go.
That was great. Thank you so much. Thank you all for. It's great to be in a three-dimensional world.
I know there's no screen.
I realized when Cara was talking, I realized I'd only met her online before. She spoke to a group not too long ago. So, and a number of you as well. So thank you for being here. Look, the reason this is so important is Cara, right?
Exactly.
People who have the talent, have the desire, have the hope that there's just something better out there for me, and I just don't know how to get there. Like, that's why we're here. That's why we need to come together. And the other thing, I was thinking about this when I was watching the video and listening to her, is so often when people like Cara are talking and we maybe do a video or hear about their story, we see kids in the background. It's Cara and her family. It's Cara and her family today, and it's a multi-generational impact that comes out of a changed life. And so that's like we just have to kind of grab onto that and say that's what we're talking about. The other thing with Cara is, even though she, you had some real work to do, right? It wasn't that far away, right? She came into Goodwill. We worked with her. She got some support. She got that degree, or that certificate rather, and she got a job afterwards. She wasn't that far away from the breakthrough. That will really, and it's not only this first job. You heard her. She is on a pathway, right? Her trajectory is upward. That is why we are here. The other reason we're here is for employers. Obviously the people we serve are live in our hearts, right? That's really what gets us up every day. But we need a skilled workforce. I mean, this is a competitive issue for our country. And it's becoming increasingly dramatic. So, if you pan out a bit, we know today we've got over 11 million unfilled jobs. We have almost 6 million unemployed, but if you add the underemployed, people earning low wages, people who are no longer even looking for a job but could be brought back into the market for the right opportunity, we have a much bigger pool of potential of candidates for those roles that I think often we realize. And by building that bridge of opportunity to them, we really serve, we really begin to solve two issues. I mean, we've got, just to make it simple, employers who have good jobs, but they need people with skills to fill them, and people who need good jobs, but need the skills to get them, right? It feels pretty clear. And what we need to do is really understand how to get into this. And Ken, I so much appreciated your remarks. Number one, by opening up the window a little bit more to say, who are we really talking about in terms of, who cannot avail themselves of opportunity today based on the system, reducing friction in the system. I think those concepts are so important here, because as we evolve, through all of our partnerships and by evolving what we do in the marketplace, those are the kinds of things that are going to open up more and more opportunities. But to make it all work, we need to work together. One of the wonderful things about the group here in the room today, and I know people listening virtually, is we have people from all spheres. And I just want to tell you, give you a little bit of a window into a participant at Goodwill that I was reading about just a couple of weeks ago. This was a young man, who had recently come out of incarceration, and he was referred to Goodwill through a state agency. So he comes to Goodwill, and we're embedded in the community. We have career navigators and counselors that can work with him. We evaluate the whole situation, and we say, well, what is, work with that person to say, well, what does the path look forward? What kind of wraparound support do you need? What kind of skills do you need? He then went into one of our Google certification programs, actually, which our partnership has enabled us to provide. The program he went into was funded by the Department of Labor. The career navigator that he was working with may well have been supported through corporate partner support. He then entered a multi-month intensive program where he received other kinds of support through other community partners, not Goodwill, but other people in the community that we work with. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, he was placed into a job with an employer who understood where he was coming from and saw value in him. You know, Kara made this point before. I had the imposter syndrome. We often see the opportunity in that individual that they may not realize exists there, right? And part of this is helping people understand what's possible and believe in themselves because they should. They have reason to believe in themselves. There's so much there. So let me just review. State agency is where we got the referral. Certification program from Google. DOL-funded program. Our competencies on the ground. Local partners to provide wraparound support. Employer at the end of the channel who said, yeah, I'm going to give this person a chance. That is what the partnership looks like. Right? That's what it needs to, and depending on who the individual is, that sort of constellation of partners may change. And so we are already doing so much well. The way Google, thank you for kind of laying out a lot of the things you all are doing, Kent, because I just think it provides such visibility into what a partner like Google can do and does do. I mean, the fact that you have 50% of the job searches coming through you all, and you're saying, like, that's an opportunity for us to make a difference. I mean, that's the way we all have to think. And so we've already seen what can work well, how to reach people, how to bring them in, how to train them, how to support them, how to help them find that ultimate job. What we need to be able to do is is to leverage that in bigger, more remarkable ways, more efficient ways, more frictionless ways, so that the opportunity, so that gap between the employment need and the human need is bridged, and people can walk across that bridge with skills in hand and say, I can get that job, and not only can I get that job, I can get on a trajectory that will change my life.
Amazing. So you're talking about the partnership, but I think it would be really helpful for this audience to understand how did it come to be? It was in 2017 from what you both explained to me, but unpack it for us.
Well, I'm not even sure if you know this story. There's a couple of you in the audience too. It was.
That's always exciting.
It was Andrew Dunkelman from Google, who's in here somewhere. I think
Where are you, Andrew?
Didn't you get into a taxi with one of our local CEOs, and you guys started talking, and we connected with our guys, and before you know it, Google said, there's something here. I mean, these are the chance opportunities, but we had two people who are in this world who said we want to kind of go somewhere, and it connected, and all of a sudden in a relatively short period of time, it morphed into a program that was called the Goodwill Digital Career Accelerator. And Google very graciously came to us and said, we want to make an impact in this space. And they funded the launch of a digital skills program that over time really sort of turbocharged our ability to support the people, to support our network in providing those skills. We operate through 155 local organizations that are autonomous across North America, heavily embedded in their local communities. And so they know the need, they have those contacts, they have access to participants. This gave many of those people sort of the added support they needed to launch those skills locally. And centrally, we provided them with a lot of sort of technical support. Over time, that partnership for us has just been magical. It's gone beyond funding support. It has gone to leveraging the infrastructure of Google. You heard Ken talk about the job searches we just mentioned, but getting support with Google Maps, getting support with Google Ads. And the third component of it has been Google providing us with talent from their team. We have a whole team of Googlers right now at Goodwill working with us on our public face to the market that is designed to help people with needs come into our network more efficiently, more effectively, and get to the right people in their local communities to get the support they need.
If I can just interject really quickly from a corporate perspective, having Google employees involved is a huge indicator that you will be successful, right? We know when you develop partnerships between corporations and nonprofit organizations that the more employees that have a stake in it all, the much more likely the program is going to have longevity. Forgive me. I didn't want to
for
interrupt.
sure.
I just think it's
important. So, at the end of the day, the support helps our participants. It helps our local organizations. It's actually helping us build infrastructure to support our local organizations more effectively. And the Googlers that are on site, there's something even beyond that, which is just having great partners. And I got to tell you, as somebody who leads a major nonprofit organization, to know that we have people, at major corporations, specifically at Google, who are there for us, who really feel like partners, people we can call up the phone. Can you help us here? Can you help us think through this? How would we do this together? It's just different. And for me, personally, it has been just an enormous encouragement.
Amazing. Kent, do you want to offer?
Sure. I mean, when people hear Google and Goodwill, they don't immediately associate those two brands, right? But we realize that the key to a successful partnership is complementarity. What unique things are you bringing to the table? So we've got the digital skill.
It just wasn't the similarity in the names.
Yeah, good, close enough.
That's right.
Well, so we can do the digital skill side.
Yeah.
We have the scale and the platforms to reach people. We put resources, I think we're now up to $200 million over the last 5 years, into the future of work and these kinds of skilling programs. But beyond it, it's really your point, Susan, about it's the tools and the magic that our employees can bring to this kind of engagement that really makes it somewhat different. And by the way, on the Goodwill side, people don't realize that 70% of Americans live within 20 miles of a Goodwill career facility. That's an incredibly powerful asset. In the same way we try and work with community colleges and others who are in the community, who know the unique needs of the community, that brings the individual support systems, the cohorts of reinforcement, the coaching that a lot of these folks need in addition to the skills, as we've talked about, the wraparound programs to really make this successful. We can provide the air cover. Goodwill is the on-the-ground team that's actually making this happen.
Excellent. Thank you both for that. So the nature of skills, job skills, has changed enormously in the last 15 years. With it, just technology literally runs our lives for the most part. So how are you both in the work that you're doing together evolving how you're training your future employees, the people that are going to be doing these jobs of the future?
Right. So I think it's really important when we enter this conversation that tech is a force for good. It can be easy. It can be easy to say, well, jobs are being automated. Artificial intelligence is doing the work of people. But at the other end, great jobs are being created, and we have to be able to make sure that we shift our lens to say, where is there opportunity here? Because this is as much about opportunity as it is about threat, right? But this isn't new. The nature of skills changing is not new. It has been going on for a long time. It's been happening rapidly over the last decade. 2/3 of the new jobs that have been created have required middle or higher skilled, higher level skills, heavily focused on digital, but also in other sectors. And for the last number of years, companies have been saying, we see a significant need to upskill our employees. And every year we see a new survey come out, and every year it continues. We need to upskill our employees. And in the last sort of 5-year survey I saw, 50% of people's employees would need significant upskilling. And so, why is it? Well, digitization has changed everything, right? And it's accelerated. It's accelerated how we work together as employees, how customers are served, how supply chains are managed. Demographics are shifting, which requires change in the healthcare industry, different products, different service types. And so people and companies really, really need to evolve. So as we think about, how we need to evolve with that, we think very, very specifically about, what are the needs in the local market? When I say we, I'm talking about 155 CEOs and a vast number of people who work, in their workforce development teams. So we think very clearly, like what is the local need? What are the skills necessary there? And how do we think about ensuring people can get tooled for those? Mm-hmm. Increasingly, we are seeing partnerships with organizations that are offering very specific support for very specific kinds of skills, which has been very helpful, but it's been very pocketed. And as I think going into the future, once again, through partnerships, whether it's with corporations, whether it's with community colleges, with corporations on the ground that are doing the hiring. We need to ensure that those relevant skills are being delivered in those places for relevant jobs that will create real opportunities. And that's going to be evolutionary over time, but it needs to be very sensitive to that evolution that's taking place.
And how has the pandemic affected all of this? I mean, it's affected everything, so I would imagine it had impact on both the work that you're doing.
Sure. I mean, the first thing to say, obviously, is the pandemic had its most dramatic impacts on folks who were struggling to get jobs, or may have been jobs where they couldn't work from home. They were at the front lines, the carers in the hospitals, but also the people who were providing services to all of us day to day. The one ray of sunshine is that there now seems to be an uptick in the wages being paid for some of those jobs at the lower end of the scale that are actually helping to narrow some of the wage gaps we've seen. So the new opportunities, Steve earlier talked about the number of jobs that are out there available right now. So in many ways, if we can use this as an opportunity, obviously, very challenging, but the upside, the silver lining in the cloud, is maybe there's a new opportunity to get people into jobs that they otherwise might not have been thought qualified for, but bring incredible resources to. Up at Harvard Business School, they've done a study about so-called hidden workers. All the resources we have, the people who have incredible talents and skills, were being kept from these jobs because of artificial barriers, like college degrees, et cetera. Maybe the pandemic gives us an opportunity to rethink that as we come back from it and re-engage and realize we have to use all of our workers.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, the pandemic is just, the flywheel got faster right here in terms of the speed of change. And so the change in the nature of, not only the nature of work, but the types of jobs and the migration to higher skilled jobs has just accelerated. And the other thing that's happened is, this concept of the great reconsideration, I think, is really valid, where people are starting to say, like, I do think I can think differently about life. I can work in a different way. Actually, the changing nature of work, I think, does provide a lot of opportunity, especially for people who need to be at home for one reason or another. We've also seen a real increase, I think, across digital platforms that provide learning opportunities for people. And so more people are going online to get the skills they need. More people are seeing that as a route forward, and that's a very positive thing. I will, though, emphasize that there is an entire segment of our population that has very limited access to that. People who either don't have digital access to begin with.
As soon as you said 50% of the searches coming through Google, I'm like, well, what are people who don't have access to a laptop or technology to do the searches?
And people who don't have foundational digital skills to be able to go into a learning platform or understand how to do those things. So it's providing a lot of opportunity. A lot of people are availing themselves of it, but there is a tier of the people that certainly we work with that we need to unlock that for, because that needs to be an opportunity for them as well. And it can be an opportunity for them if they get the access and the foundational skills to be able to pursue them.
Absolutely. Next page. I have 1,000 questions, so don't worry, you're not going to be stuck to listen to all of them. But how can, in your partnership, advance equitable economic mobility? So how do we ensure this is equal opportunity for everyone?
Yeah, a lot of the partners we're working with through social finance and others are specifically focused on underrepresented minority groups, as well as the urban-rural divide that we're seeing throughout the country. And that's going to be critical as we try and make sure that people can transition into the new, not just new ways of working, and new skills, but also new sort of soft skills, ways of figuring out how to integrate into an evolving economy. So we're doing a lot of outreach with a lot of different partners. And again, it's going to be, the partnership side is key, because it will be folks who have established trusted relationships in the communities that give people the confidence to go, whether they have access online or not. In many cases, they may be just walking into a Goodwill community center, skilling center. That's the bridge that makes that happen.
Yeah, I think, I'm glad you framed the question that way, because I think this is an issue of equity. Nearly 60% of the people who walk through our doors are people of color. Over 80% of the people we work with are people who have a high school degree or less. Kent cited numbers on the percentages of people in different people groups who don't have a college degree, who are automatically screened out of so many jobs in the marketplace. And so and often when somebody comes through our door, we see in that individual the accumulated inequities that person has experienced in their life, in where they are at that time, and in the type of support they need. And I just, this is an opportunity to sort of change that trajectory and change that future. And I just want to say, they do the changing. We just have the great privilege. Well, and we get to walk alongside people. But somebody said to me recently, "You can't dream what you've never seen." And there's a lot to that. Exactly. And I'll never forget one of our success stories. A young lady saying, "Where I came from, people didn't talk about career paths. I had no idea where to go." It's just part of this is access and visibility, but it is an issue of equity, and it is a way for us to work together to bring opportunity to a situation that may not have been there otherwise. And one of the biggest issues we have to do is believe that it's possible. Our employers have to realize that this isn't, it's not about charity. This is about opportunity for everybody. There's value in this for everybody. This is something that matters to all of us, and we have to view it that way. But this is absolutely at the crux of economic mobility and equity.
I think, Steve, you're making a vitally important point that I think we all need to leave, when we leave this conference today, walk out realizing we have to change this perception that you have to have all these degrees, as I drop my microphone, to get a job. I'd love to see a show of hands. How many of you have are employers or been employers, and you required a college degree for your employees? Nobody in the room? Well, then you're obviously very evolved, because a lot of major employers would say a college degree. So we have to do, and people of power are the ones that need to take this step forward to realize that there are enormous skills we are not, we're closing a blind eye to. So thank you. I didn't mean to jump on your sentence.
Not at all.
I just think it's important. But I'm very impressed with this audience, because if I asked that in a normal quote unquote conference, the vast majority of people would raise their hands. So how do we get more Googles coming to the table to realize this is important? Private sector companies that are willing to make such a large, not only monetary, but employer commitment to this cause.
To Steve's earlier point, I think it does need to move.
You dropped yours too.
Yeah, there you go.
We're all flying. Watch out in the front.
Right. I think it has to move beyond sort of charitable work to look at the underlying economic drivers of why is this attractive for employers. The fact that 150 employers have come forward to work with the Google Career Certificate Program is a sign that they want to do it, because they are having trouble finding the talented people to fill the jobs they have. Right? So how do we build on that? I was talking earlier with Seth from the White House, who will be speaking later on today. So much of this is going to need to shift to the private sector. They're trying to find ways to make these skilling programs more standardized, more broadly available to people. The National Association of Manufacturers have standardized skilling, but that's an increasingly small minority of the jobs in our country. How do we have standardized skilling programs that work for skills-based kinds of jobs going forward? And how do we make those broadly available to a broad sector of employers? If the state governments are taking the lead, we mentioned a couple of examples earlier on, I think it becomes easier for companies to dip their toe in the water. To recognize that you can find talent in all sorts of different places. And in many cases, those can be your best, most loyal, most productive employees.
Yeah. I was talking to a friend who's works at a very senior level in a large consulting firm. And I said to him, your HR practice should be in the middle of this. And the reason is, I think so many employers, first of all, I think there has been a pretty rapid growth in awareness of the issue because of the great work that a lot of people in this room are doing together. And it's provided really important visibility. And I think the stress in the labor market is making people say, I actually do have to think about hiring differently because I have a need. And so necessity is the mother of invention, right? But we have to help, I think we need to help corporations see the way here, and because I do think there are a lot of corporate leaders who are saying, I don't really know what to do. And I hear this from people, and I've read this in terms of survey results and that type of thing. And so I think it's really important to say, what does it take for an employer to begin taking the steps forward to be effective in this area? Why is there value, and what will it take? And we are beginning to see case studies emerge. We are beginning to see really wonderful practices emerge, but it takes work, right? You need to think differently about your intake process. A lot of companies have that completely automated, right? And it's based on screening out. It's not based on screening in, based on competencies. It's based on screening out. We find that when people do redesign their job postings, those postings are actually a lot better. They're much more nuanced in terms of, maybe you need communication skills or collaboration skills or something very targeted. And all of a sudden people say, well, no, I can see myself in that. I can't see myself in the 4-year degree requirement, but I can see myself in that. And it makes employers better at saying what's really going to be successful in this job. We know that there are other impediments in the intake. I think it affects how people interview people. People from different experiences and different backgrounds are not going to sound like the person that maybe you sat next to in college, right? I was talking to one of our mission leaders a couple of weeks ago who works a lot with people with disabilities, and she was discussing how incredibly successful a particular person who has Asperger's is in their new job because of their focus on detail and rigor and everything else. And this person had saved their organization nearly $400,000. But when they interviewed, the feedback was, I got such clipped answers, and people he didn't really engage that much. Well, we got to get that somebody who's comes to us who may not have had our experience is going to seem different in that place and may add a lot of richness to our organization in other ways. And then it also affects the onboarding and support once somebody comes into an organization. Earlier I said people have to believe there's value there. People have to believe there's sort of an ROI there. There's also a richness to your community as an employer that is built by bringing in, a richer population. It also breeds more creativity, more viewpoints, and any number of studies have shown that companies who have more inclusive, more diverse hiring practices see higher levels of creativity, higher levels of financial performance, and any number of other benefits, in addition to creating a much richer community in the workplace.
Let me add two quick things. I think it takes a certain level of intentionality for employers. It's one thing to get rid of some of the barriers, but a company like Accenture has put out a bold goal of hiring 20% of its employees without college degrees from alternative sources. That's what allows somebody like Cara to succeed and get a foot in the door to test the water.
And feel welcome,
And
too.
feel welcome and feel a sense of belonging in that. Yeah. So at Google, for example, traditionally we had a notion of culture fit. Was somebody going to be a good fit for our culture? We realized, wait a second, we risk replicating just the culture we have. We've shifted from the notion of culture fit to the notion of culture add, to think about what new things people can bring that we don't already have.
I love that. I've been running a communications firm for 10 years, and I was guilty of, looking at the college degree for a long time. And one of the best hires we made maybe 2 years ago is a woman who excelled at the McDonald's management program. I can tell you she is extraordinary, and the experience she brings is so fresh and new, and it completely solidified exactly what you're saying. So we have about 3.5 minutes left, and I'd love to turn our attention to tomorrow. What does the future of this partnership look like, and what is success maybe 2 years from now? And I know this wasn't one of the planned questions, so
I have a 4-page list.
Yeah, let me talk about the what very quickly, and Steve can talk in much more detail and with more expertise about the how. As we start to focus on things like this $100 million social finance grant, which is going to be a rotating loan program, the criteria for the success of that program are quite clear. We need to have people in jobs so they can start repaying those loans for the next generation of people to take advantage of. If they're not coming back out of the program, if the programs are not fit for purpose, if they're not actually finding employers and they're not actually, the training is not aligning with what the employers need, employers are not going to hire the folks and the program's not going to succeed. So we're very focused on the data-based output, as you may expect from the folks at Google. We want to make sure that this on the ground really works in practice and becomes a model to take it from thousands to millions. Steve?
Thank you.
Yeah, this isn't. First of all, this isn't just about Goodwill and Google. Although, as much as it is, we're pretty happy about it, right? This is about all of our sectors coming together in ways where we bring, what we have that is unique and powerful to this equation. And what is really exciting for me is when we see large corporations like Google and others say, we're going to try something creative over here. We're going to look at supporting this over here. We're going to be using our platform for something different. We're seeing all of these kind of unique contributions from various sectors come together in ways that just we haven't seen before, and both in the number of different types of creative ideas and in the scale. And so, from my perspective, certainly from where I sit, we want everybody in this space to be successful because we're all driving toward a similar mission here, which is to support those people, who need it, who can find a different trajectory in their lives if we can just work with them to kind of, help them along that way. So this partnership, I think is an important window for other partnerships that can develop both with our organizations and elsewhere, across the country. And that's why in my earlier comments I said what we need to have is to give corporations and other nonprofits and government leaders visibility into where the magic happens and how to make that more impactful and how to scale it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. So, just a few lasting thoughts. Let's do away with our preconceived notions of what employment looks like. It takes a village, and going forward, these types of partnerships are what are going to drive solutions. So thank you, Kent. Thank you, Steve. Thank you for the work you're doing. I want to thank everyone in the audience for joining us. And I just have to say one other thing. Listening to Kent's Boston accent was such a joy for me because my late mom grew up in Dorchester, and she's been gone a very long time, so hearing his voice was just so grounding. So thank you. Thank you all.
To hear this. If you think about it, right now, we're worried about inflation, supply chain disruptions, possible World War III. You go on social media, everybody's arguing, fighting with each other. Here in DC, as you can tell, a lot of politics. But instead, you would think Google, Goodwill, Accenture, and other companies would say, you know what, let me just stick to the knitting. Let's do what we do best and not worry about it. But I think we all have to give them credit to say, hey, we're going to do things to help people, to make their lives better, to find jobs. And that's amazing because they didn't have to do it. Google is amazingly successful. They can just keep doing what they're doing. Goodwill does a fantastic job. But bringing aboard 150 companies, the public to be involved as well is just amazing. And I'd like to have, speaking of another person, so Richmond, we're here, right? We had a tough time in the elevator getting up, so I'm glad he's here. So I want to welcome Richmond Vincent. He's the president and CEO of Goodwill Industries in the Valley's headquartered in beautiful Roanoke, Virginia, and serves about 60,000 people every year. Richmond also serves as a campaign division co-chair for the Roanoke Regional Partnership and a member of the Goodwill Industries Board of Directors. He previously served as the president of CEO Goodwill Industries, of South Mississippi and Mississippi Good Works, and he was recognized as the best CEO in Mississippi. Prior to Goodwill, he served as in leadership roles with financial institutions, worked on the Governor's Council of Workforce Policy in Arizona, and chairman of Maricopa County Workforce Investment Board. Wow. So you're very busy, and you have a lot going on. So thank you, and lead the moderation.
You're welcome. Ma'am. You're great. Great, Bruce. I'm Whoopi. Well, good morning, everyone. Again, my name is Richmond Vincent. We always laugh. We have a little inside joke. We always laugh because I have one of the longest resumes in the world, and it's more about the font and the spacing than it is about content. So thank you for that. I also wanted to also thank Cara, who spoke to us earlier today. As a local Goodwill CEO, and many of my colleagues are here today, we get the opportunity to experience the Caras each and every day. Each and every day, we get the opportunity to impact someone's life, utilizing the skills and many of the things that were discussed with Kent and Steve. We get to experience that every single day. So for me, it's a pleasure to be here, and it's a pleasure to have a discussion today. So with that said, I'm going to get into introducing our fabulous panel today. We have 5 outstanding individuals today. And so they have some very distinguished resumes, and I want to tell you all about them. First, Byron August. He's the founder and chief executive officer of Opportunity at Work. Byron leads this national nonprofit which researches the way businesses systematically overlook the millions of workers skilled through alternative routes, which is STARS, like community college, military service, training programs, skills boot camps, and learning on the job rather than a bachelor's degree, and partners with employers to change their hiring and recruiting practices. Prior to co-founding Opportunity at Work, Byron served as Deputy Director of the National Economic Council during President Barack Obama's administration and was a senior partner at McKinsey & Company. And you will see a consistent theme. There's a lot of folks on this stage who have been a part of the McKinsey & Company family. Next, Wendy Myers. Wendy Myers Cambor is Managing Director, North America HR Strategy for Accenture, the global professional services company with over 700,000 people in 120 countries, serving Fortune 500 clients with human ingenuity and technology to improve the way the world works and lives. Wendy is responsible for talent strategies and workforce development initiatives that cultivate diversity, strengthen communities, and increase economic opportunity. Before turning to Accenture, Wendy was the founder and president of Dolphin Lane, and previously held positions at Morgan Stanley and Fidelity Investments. And also, Wendy serves on the Women's Leadership Board at Harvard Kennedy School. Next, we have Mr. Maurice Jones. Maurice was appointed President and Chief Executive Officer of 110 in March of 2021. 110 is a coalition of leading chief executives and their companies who are coming together to upskill, hire, and promote 1 million Black Americans over the next 10 years. Outstanding. Who do not yet have a 4-year degree into family-sustaining jobs with the opportunities for advancement. Prior to joining 110, Maurice was president and CEO of the local Initiative Support Corporation, one of the country's largest organizations supporting projects to revitalize communities and catalyze economic opportunities for residents. Maurice also served as the Virginia Secretary of Commerce. Didn't know Maurice was a part of the Commonwealth, and he also served as Deputy Secretary of HUD. Next is Tracy Palangian, excuse me, Tracy, did I get it right? Palangian, yes, I did. Is co-founder and chief executive officer of Social Finance, a national impact finance and advisory nonprofit that builds innovative partnerships and investments to measurably improve lives. To date, Social Finance has catalyzed over $350 million to help more than 45,000 people realize improved outcomes in education, finance, economic mobility, health, and housing. Prior to Social Finance, Tracy was a managing director at the Parthenon Group and also worked at Wellington Management Company and McKinsey and Company. And last, but definitely not least, is Mr. Greg Siegel. He is the Chief Business Officer of Guild Education, which partners with the nation's largest employers to build strategic education and reskilling experiences for their employees by connecting them to the best universities and learning providers designed for working adults. Prior to the Guild, Greg led strategy operations and sales at Applied Predictive Technologies, a software as a service firm which enables global Fortune 2000 companies to predict the impact of key business changes through in-market experience. And in fact, Greg led the sale of APT to MasterCard. So Greg, thank you for that. All right, so that is introducing our great panel. So we have about 50 minutes, a little bit more than what Steve and Kent have. So through equity, we are going to get through our panel today, but we're going to have some fun doing it. But let me kind of set the stage in terms of what we're going to talk about today. So we've seen some encouraging signs as the pandemic helped catapult workers into more upwardly mobile, new-collar roles that often involve tech skills and come with better pay, flexible work schedules, and job security. So I know you're probably asking the question, what is new-collar? Well, what is new-collar jobs? In the past, American jobs have generally been classified into one of two categories, white-collar and blue-collar. The former typically includes jobs performed in an office setting by highly skilled and formally trained professionals, while the latter generally refers to labor jobs that often require professionals to work with their hands. Today's workforce, however, are seeking job opportunities that don't necessarily require a bachelor's degree. We've talked about that here through, with Steve and also with others, that doesn't require a bachelor's degree to do call for a highly specialized skill set. And this particular phrase was coined by Ginny Rometty, president and CEO of IBM, who termed new-collar jobs. So a couple things to get us started, and then we'll jump right into our discussion, was our working age population is increasing, but the labor force participation rate is down. There's a record number of job openings, over 11 million. But what's most important is our recovering workforce is not about the employed versus the unemployed. It's really about the unengaged. So we'll discuss that as we go forward. So with that said, I want to jump into our esteemed panel today. And our first question is, what are you seeing and learning about creating equitable talent pipelines? Who's going to be our first? Byron?
I'll start. I'll just say, first of all, we're seeing and learning so much more than we can encompass in this discussion. There is amazing work going on in communities all around the country. It's happening. Companies are doing it. Labor unions are doing it. Nonprofits of all varieties, like just communities coming together. And I think from the standpoint of training, from the standpoint of coaching, all of this, there's so much great stuff going on. And in fact, I will add that much of the great stuff is happening. It's being led by people who will never be in a room like this because they are sort of deep in the community doing that work. They don't have access to these rooms. They don't have voice in these rooms. And I think so therefore, I don't think the question is, boy, can we find something that's working? There's so much that's working. I think the real question is, why are these amazing efforts not replicating? Why are they not scaling? Why aren't they not accomplishing more? And I think the answer is because there's a system breakdown, there's a connection breakdown. And so you've got this tremendous effort, this unbelievable creativity based on lived experience in many cases, and it's not being empowered. So to me right now, at the cutting edge of this, what I'm most interested in are the efforts that connect the dots. So like the apprenticeship network that Accenture and Aon and others are doing, right. Like the work that allows STARS, who's been mentioned a couple of times here, who are skilled through alternative routes, to get past the degree requirement and just show what they can do based on skills. And there's a lot of this going on, and I hope we'll talk about more of that, but I hope we don't forget that what we talk about that's great is a tiny fraction of what's great out there in the country, and it's really how do we allow all that greatness to flow through and connect.
What, Nadine?
Yeah, I'd love to follow up on that because that is the key message, I think, of today. as well as Byron was saying, you don't need to go it alone to have social impact. There are extraordinary complementary organizations who are really specialists in their piece of this important puzzle. You said earlier, I work for Accenture. Our purpose as an organization is to promise on the technology and human ingenuity of the future. And our commitment to our people, our clients, and our communities is to accelerate equity for all. So we really have a corporate culture that aligns very well with this topic that we're talking about today. We're a very talent-led organization. You said we have 700,000 people. 200,000 of them have started with us since the start of 2021, needless to say, the tightest labor market in history. We also consider ourselves a learning organization. I started at Accenture out of college in '88. I left and I came back. But that culture of learning has really continued to be a core value of ours. Because as the pace of change accelerates, so does the shelf life of technology skills, right? So to give you benchmarks, we invest $1 billion every year in our own people's learning and upskilling. It's right up to the top of the food chain. Our CEO, Julie, makes it part of her agenda to the point of including learning in her leadership meetings. Another great example is we had 100,000 people certified in cloud computing in the first 6 months of the pandemic. So learning, talent acquisitions, and if you can't already tell, metrics is important to us because we really feel metrics drives accountability, and accountability drives change. And I think you heard earlier today, an important metrics for this discussion are 20% of our entry-level hires this year will be apprentices, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. And 45% of our open roles no longer require a bachelor's degree. So that really speaks to the topic, which is so important, which is skills-based hiring, right? Looking at the skills, finding those skills, creating those skills in the market, and matching them to real business need, and that real business need, we are careful to align with those jobs that we're aware will be reduced, if not, obsolete from technology. So I run Future Talent. It's a real privilege because every day I get to work with a great team that brings to life these, new on-ramps. Specifically through our apprenticeship program, which Cara, is a thriving graduate of. Right. She's one of well over 1,200 successful apprentices who work in all lines of our business, who work in all industries, and who we equip through different partners with different skills, not just for a job, but for a career path. That's very important to us. They get a family-sustaining wage, they get full benefits, and they get this learn and earn classroom and on-the-job training. So it's my privilege to be running that group and bringing apprentices, to life for our organization and increasingly for other organizations, our clients and our communities. We've started in 2016, so we've been at this a while. And in 2019, we introduced a high school apprenticeship program. So kids come from high school and, they're working for us while they're getting their high school degree, which opens up new career paths for them if they choose not to go to college. And I'd also mention that we have expanded beyond our walls to apprentice networks, starting in Chicago, partnering with Aon. We partner with different companies. We now have 7 in 7 key cities. So if anyone's, sort of thinking to themselves, I don't know, how do I do this? We'd love to get you involved, even if you're at the beginning, because, it's one of those rare opportunities, I think, where the business strategy aligns to the talent strategy, aligns to the social impact strategy. Right. And how great is that? So our networks invite companies and CEO sponsors in to learn together and to create together with companies, government organizations, as well as various for-profit and not-for-profit skilling and talent introducing organizations. So it's pretty great to be doing something so important, and nobody's competing with each other. We're all working together.
That's right. That's excellent. So Maurice, representing 110, you represent a number of large employers. What are you saying?
Look, I won't repeat what I'll say. Amen to what has already been said, and then let me add one other element. You can't have an equitable pipeline unless you focus on jobs plus. You got to focus on transportation. You got to make sure childcare is there. You got to have allies and sponsors and mentors. You got to have financial literacy. And so it's a team sport. And so what we're seeing is that if you really want to make sure that black talent and all the talent of color and folks who are living in rural areas and others really have access to these jobs that are being made available, you also have to make sure that they have transportation to the job.
That's right.
Right? And so I want to really focus on the fact that sectors, you need companies, you need trainers and educational enterprises, you need talent, and you need wraparound supports. That group has to be a high-functioning team, right? And so we as a country are not there yet. But we as a country can be there, and I'm delighted that in particular, frankly, the private sector is leading some of the most innovative pieces I've seen in putting these players together. But you've got to have all those players, or your hope of equity will be a hope.
So Maurice, so you talk about the supports. Do you see a role for the community partners?
Oh, yeah.
And leveraging their resources to provide those?
You have to have the community partners, right? You have to have the Goodwills of the world have to be part of that equation. Folks who are providing coaches and mentors have to be a part of that equation. The guilds of the world have to be a part of that equation. I mean, it really is a team sport. And the thing is, the beauty is the assets are there.
That's right.
But the assets have to become part of a high-functioning team. And that's, I think, the work still to be done.
Tracy, saw you looking at.
Well,
Get some input here.
this has been such a great conversation, and I couldn't agree with Maurice more that yes, companies can change their hiring practices and focus on skills-based hiring, competency-based hiring. We have pockets of solution around the country that is waiting to be replicated and scaled up and lifted up. And the system in general hasn't been working in a frictionless way, to borrow one of Kent's words earlier. What I really see is that we are living in a golden window. For all of us dedicated to the mission of economic mobility, we could not have a more golden opportunity to try new things. We talked about, you said, Richmond, that there are unprecedented labor shortages, right?
Yes.
Like for every job out there, there's half a person looking for work. You know, for the first time, we don't have people looking for work, but rather jobs looking for people. We are also, I think all of us, reinterrogating the kind of like whether college, the 4-year degree, is a ticket to the middle class. For the first time, we're basically seeing data, and the professor at Harvard, Raj Chetty, said that if you're born in the 1940s, only 8% of people went to college if you're born in the 1940s, yet you have a 90% chance of out-earning your parents. Yet, kids born today, you have a 40% chance of going to college, yet less than 50% of out-earning your parents, right? So the economic grand bargain that you would get to the middle class and have sustainable lives and economically secure lives is massively being challenged. And that's why I love the work that Byron's doing, focusing on STARS, skilled through alternative routes. But it's not just the skilling, as Maurice said. It's also the wraparound supports and all the stuff that comes with life that presents to folks who are facing barriers to education and training, that we also need to address those needs too. So I hope we'll have a chance to double click on what Kent said earlier about the $100 million Google career certificate fund. that we are very excited to be the investment manager for, and how we're thinking about designing the right, financing gets a bad rep, it sounds technical and boring, but how we optimizing how the money moves around so that the worker and the outcomes for that worker is at the center for the arrangement, and how we think about funding for wraparounds, how we think about employer engagement, and how we think about scale so that we can reach millions of people, not tens and thousands of people.
Absolutely. Greg?
Yeah, you asked the question, what's working fundamentally, and I'll connect what both Maurice and Tracy said. Fundamentally, the assets are there, and I think the question that increasingly is being asked is, why are they not being used if the assets are there? And I think it really comes down to what Tracy is talking about, which is the single biggest barrier for access for so many Americans is I can't afford, or I don't have the financial access to actually take part in the skilling that is out there. And so, we have the privilege of sitting alongside a number of employers who are trying to rethink how do they make their skilling programs more successful. And I think the single most salient fact is when employers make their skilling programs truly financially accessible. Debt-free is the language we would use. You can often see 10 or 20 times the participation rates. Free truly needs to be free if the average American has $400 in their bank account. And I think the system is finally looking at that as one of the biggest barriers alongside the other ones that Maurice was talking about.
What I would also add too is geographic barriers, and then access to broadband. As you look at some of our rural communities, they don't have that access. So that is a major challenge. So we've talked about what's working. So let's look at the other side of that coin. What are some opportunities you have to improve? What's not working?
I'll kick it off based on some of the things we've been discussing here. I think there is a tendency to have a lot of energy around learning and training and access, and absolutely the wraparound to make it even feasible to, be upskilled. In my humble opinion and experience, the learning leads to the hiring, and the hiring is not the finish line. The hiring really, in my view, is the starting line. And insofar as companies get this incredible opportunity, this golden opportunity, it's, I think, very important to, be bold, commit at the most senior levels, but also rethink your talent strategy, rethink how you are going to ensure that, in my case, apprentices are positioned not only for success in their apprenticeship, which for us is 12 months of learning and working, but beyond. And that takes a lot more bespoke sort of involvement from the business, from human resources, from different, points in your talent supply chain to really shift the way they work. And at the same time, I'll introduce the paradox that the ultimate goal is to have this type of talent be business as usual, built into your sales pitches, built into how you, in our case, right, because we're a services firm, built into how you support your clients, and built into the apprentice employee experience to be positioned for continuous learning and true success in a career. And I say that this is something I've noticed. We've been fortunate. We've been, operating at scale, increasingly accelerating to scale. But what I'm starting to see is clients who say, I see what's happening here, and it sounds good, and I've gone to this organization and hired some people there, but it's not successful, right? Because it's not something to be taken lightly or to be considered, one more recruiting channel. I believe success comes from a wholesale change in how you think about your people and their potential.
Outstanding. Byron, thoughts?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of technical and system things that aren't working, but I would emphasize that the way the system, the hiring system and even the conversations we have around future of work kind of tend to default are based on, I would say, kind of a pile of conveniences for like sort of people who are in a pretty comfortable position, which a bachelor's degree screen is an example of that. It's like moderately convenient to do, when you've got a lot of applicants, but it's actually incredibly damaging. But I think underlying it, there's two really pretty deep falsehoods that our system is based on, and that a lot of smart people believe, and they're absolutely wrong. The first is there's an equation between this idea that if low wage means low skill. And you constantly see these two ideas sort of interposed, just substituted randomly. Right. But low wage is not low skill. Low wage is low paid. And if you look at low wage jobs, most of them actually require significant skills. And it is a total myth that there's like a skill set for these low wage jobs and there's an entirely different skill set for these, the whole idea of a professional job versus blue collar or whatever. I mean, it's honestly garbage, like when you look at the data. And we've looked at it at Opportunity at Work. We've looked at 130 million job transitions. We've looked at the skills distance from every job to every other job. And the 71 million stars in this country who don't have college degrees but do have skills, skilled through alternative routes, that's stars, of the 71 million, 30 million have skills for jobs that pay 50% more than the jobs they're in today. The same ones that employers are screaming they can't find, right? Skilled people for. No, you in other words, there are, you could see it, like believe your eyes, like during COVID, did you see what essential workers were doing and like reconfiguring supply chains and safety protocols, like on the fly, that kind of teamwork, all that? That's skill, right? That's skill, that's adaptability, that's exactly what businesses say they want. Like, over 70% of essential workers are stars. So it's complete mythology, which bleeds into the second one, which is this idea that a college degree needs to be table stakes for a quote-unquote skilled job, i.e. a well-paid job. So that math doesn't work at all. In the last 20 years we've gone to, at a peak, it's down a little bit now, but about 70% of new jobs were saying, oh, we want a bachelor's degree, you have to have a bachelor's degree, and less than 40% of people have a bachelor's degree. So that's basic math that doesn't work, but it's also completely unnecessary, back to the point of you have millions of people with these jobs. So I just think we should be a lot less surprised when these efforts work, because the one thing that is like stars are out there working every day, learning, and if we could just have a job market, a labor market, a set of systems where if you can do the job, you can get the job, and if you learn something valuable, you can earn something more. And when that pathway is working, that money flows behind it. It shouldn't be so hard. So I'm happy to be on stage with people working on many parts of this and in the room with people working on many parts of this. But please understand, the problem is not out there in the country. The problem is with the systems that shut people out.
And if I may, Richmond, the system is basically, say the employers all change and, governors around the country are also lifting the BA requirement, and Accenture, so many employers in Maurice's network, in Gilt's network. But even if they were to remove the BA requirement, people who want to get skilled through alternative routes still have to take time off, take the risk that that journey might not pan out, often pay, unless you're lucky enough to be with a guild employer and they pay for it, or you're lucky enough to land a high quality workforce program that's free to you, or you're lucky enough to land a scholarship. The individual is bearing all the risk of failure to get upskilled, not least, the higher ed journey is a testament to that, right? Like people take time off, take on massive loans to go on this 4-year degree journey, and many don't graduate with a degree, and even if they graduate, they don't have employable skills, hence the $1.7 trillion student debt crisis, right? So the current financing mechanism, the risk is asymmetrically borne by the individual who is the least equipped to bear those financial risks. And what we're hoping to do in rethinking the talent finance journey is to remove the risk from the individual and have the risk arrangement be shared by capital providers like the public sector, like employers, and actually the training institutions themselves. Why should a college or a training program collect tuition revenue whether or not they're successful at getting people skills and landing jobs? So for example, the Google certificate program that we just launched that Kent just mentioned, students get to enroll for free into Europe's program, into Merit America's program, into other programs that we are in the process of underwriting. The deal is that if and only if they graduate from the program and land a job that pays more than $40,000 or $45,000, which represents a significant wage bump than their current conditions, they would repay the cost of the program at no interest, typically spread over a 5-year period, around $100 a month. And if at any given point in time they fall out of the labor force or they have an adverse family situation they can't pay, they are obligated to pay nothing. So the idea that the training providers actually have skin in the game, in this case Merit, Europe, and others, in this case that Google provided the financing, and the financing is not CSR dollars, it's not just philanthropy dollars, it's actually balance sheet money that's return seeking plus philanthropy dollars, and combining it in creative ways that neither philanthropy or loans can achieve alone. It's really that power of scale and creative structuring, all with an eye toward benefiting the worker, is what we're focused on.
And I think it's wonderful, and again, that notion of focusing on the worker. You know, I work with Europe quite closely. One of their biggest barriers to growth is that when they advertise in communities and when they share this opportunity, right, which is no cost to you, right, you know, you learn and you work, people think it's a scam, right? So I wouldn't underestimate, with all of this extraordinary, you know, work going on and a really cohesive ecosystem, that 26% of U.S. workers face a triple challenge, right? So don't have the access or limit, you know, or availability or belief in this training that we're hearing about today. Their jobs are at risk of automation, and they've been marginalized due to COVID. So that's nearly a third of U.S. workers and growing. So, you know, the idea of connecting the dots and of making it work, focusing and anchoring to that worker, you know, is the secret, and I think we got some great organizations, you know, really ready to work together, and it's unusual, right? It's unusual not to be competing, right? It's this great opportunity that we're all, you know, directed at the same desired outcome, and, you know, here we are in a labor market that we are, where those who sort of didn't get it originally are now faced with impossible demands in technology hiring, and it's just, you know, it's what did you call it? The golden moment, right?
That's right. So Greg, you're doing some things over at the Guild. So how are you guys addressing some of these issues that have been discussed?
Yeah, so Wendy just talked about, you know, employers coming to terms with the current labor market. Kent gave that statistic earlier. Every year we create about 6.5 million jobs in this country, but we lose 6 million.
That's right.
One of the byproducts of that is often the jobs we're losing had a different skills, a set of needs than the jobs we're creating. And I think fundamentally the business community is waking up to just how severe the labor shortage is, and that it's not a supply-demand matching problem. There's not enough supply. And so fundamentally, the thing that people are waking up to is we can't hire our way out of this crisis. The healthcare industry is seeing this very specifically. I was talking to a hospital provider this week who has 40,000 open nursing jobs.
Wow.
40,000. And through travel nursing, through hiring each other, we're not going to solve it. What we have to do is create more nurses. And that example applies in all sectors. What nursing is experiencing now, almost every industry is going to face over the coming decades. And so what we're seeing are those, and I think Accenture is a great example of this, that are saying rather than continuing to spend $1 trillion, which is what we spend per year in this country on hiring, and only $200 billion on training, that balance has to change. We need to develop our own talent, be it a pipeline of those that work for us today, or programs like Accenture is doing of I'm going to hire and then skill and have an earn and learn type system. Those are working almost out of necessity, given the old practices just can't keep up with where supply and demand are misbalanced.
And to skill and keep skilling,
Right.
right? The acceleration of the skills curve. We're really living in a world where skills are the currency, not degrees, not job titles, to really, as I mentioned, your talent strategy part of that is really staying ahead of what your organization needs, what your clients need, and being, super innovative and super agile to deliver it.
And I absolutely agree with that, with what Greg's saying. Of course, you need to, the learning is kind of at the center of it. You can call it, but the point is learning, people are learning all the time. I mean, people are learners. It's almost a defining trait of our species. And so it's very true, but it's also not anything new. Like, people are learning at work all the time. The reason low wage jobs don't equate to low skills is because people have to learn to do those too, and they're gaining skills all the time. I have a skills gap between the skills I have today and what I'm going to need next year to accomplish my goals. We all do. So in other words, it's absolutely true that we need to be constantly getting, and by the way, I'm not going to learn it all by myself. I'll have all sorts of resources and supports and assets and mentors and everything to do it. That's how it works, period, for anyone. Nobody does this by themselves. So we don't have to treat it as something pathological or even unusual that we need to have a system. We need to have supports for people because we all have them, right? It's just, well, we don't all have them, but all of us who've gotten somewhere have them, okay? And so other people can get there too if they have them. So that's the way I see it. I totally agree with Greg, but I don't see this as something new or curious. It's just, let's bring everyone into the fold and have the support they need.
And maybe I would propose that it is that way, and companies would benefit from formalizing it, right?
I agree with that.
We grew up, you had a chapter of learn, culminating in a bachelor's, right? And then work. That doesn't work for anybody anymore. And, when I say formalize it, or again, metrics, we're all about metrics. We have a technology quotient program for all employees of Accenture, not just those who are doing technology or consulting, but every single person from our EAs to our C-suite have a very rigorous technology training program that we go through every year to be sure that we understand blockchain and cloud computing and data and computational analytics, and to really make it a requirement. I think recognizing that every job changes and every job needs new skills, requiring it and investing in it and measuring it.
But investing in it is key, and the upward mobility is key. We can all say, all the things that Byron just said, but the reality is that economic mobility is declining. People are switching from a low-wage job to another low-wage job, so that fluidity that Ken talked about, we need upward fluidity, right? Right now, we're basically seeing sclerosis in the low-wage jobs, and we need to, like Greg talked about the example of an integrated health system. You should be able to come in as maybe a food service worker in the cafeteria at hospital, and then find ways to become a licensed practical nurse. Maybe you eye another allied health profession, and there's a pathway for you to become a surgical technician, and then et cetera, right? It's like, so those pathways that Guild is building with their employer partners, many of the promotions that 110 is very much focused on in incumbent employers. We really need to pay attention to those pathways because economic mobility is the key. And if we just swap around people in their existing strata, we're just not really achieving anything.
So let me add one additional thing. You started with what's not working. Maybe I'll say it a different way. There is a muscle that we need much more of for it to work that we don't have, and that's trust, right? So we all said, look, this is a team sport. You need employers, you need trainers, you need talent, you need wraparound supports. Between them, you need trust, right? Employers need to trust that there is talent that they're not tapping. Talent need to be able to trust that employers really want them, all of them, that they want black talent, that they want white talent, that they want Latin. They have to be able to trust that, and they want us as we are, right? Not all of us have bald heads, but you know what I mean, right?
Just the cool ones have bald heads.
Just the cool ones. So talent have to trust that people want them. Organizations that are preparing and providing mentors and coaches, they have to trust that you really care about that talent, right? The most important currency here really is trust. It's how we build trust every day amongst those employers, or I should say amongst those players in that ecosystem, so that when things don't go right, and by the way, that will be every day, that folks don't walk away, that they don't conclude, I told you it wouldn't work, I told you they're not there. You need more, we need to really take on as one of our jobs to inspire trust amongst ourselves, because this is a marathon, and the only way you get through that is that you trust your teammate. And that is a muscle that we have a lot of work to build in order to really make these pieces work together as a high-functioning team.
Now, totally agreed in terms of the trust with the employer, trust with the talent. So then how do we look at trust with the government, and how can the government better support some of the things we're talking about? Tracy?
I'm so excited about the next panel, which is around the federal response, and that's another reason why this is the golden moment, right, of economic mobility. There's an unprecedented amount of money flowing from the federal government to state and local government to jumpstart economic mobility and reboot economic mobility in America. So the Google Fund is obviously a private sector fund with philanthropy dollars and balance sheet dollars, but we're also working with governors and mayors around the country to think about anchoring the same worker retraining upskilling fund that also support wraparound services, but using public dollars. So, for example, in New Jersey, we are working with Governor Phil Murphy to set up what we call a Pay It Forward fund to align that workforce development fund with the state's economic development agenda. It happens to be IT, healthcare, and offshore wind. So because of that economic development agenda, the workforce fund is going to focus on skilling people into those jobs and occupations. And again, it works just like the Google Fund. Successful workers would repay the cost of the program back into the fund so that future workers can benefit from the recycling of those dollars. And we're really seeing this taken up by governors across the country because they just love the idea that, one, I know if the program's working because the design of the program is inherently outcomes focused. If people repay back into the fund, that means it's working, people got a job. And two, they love the idea that it can stretch that same workforce development dollars into multiple rounds. Right now, it's a one-time grant use. You spend the money, and next year you have to come up with another workforce development budget. Here, even if you get 60 cents on the dollar back, and then you stretch it again for several rounds, the idea that you can get more impact per public dollar spent is also resonating with folks. And it's still very early on, but we're seeing just some great momentum in Texas and Colorado and California and in the Northeast. Again, this idea that you can blend private capital with public capital with philanthropy in creative ways that really take these ideas to scale. Going back to where Byron started, we have solutions, but we need to lift them and scale them.
Yeah. Well, Maurice, I'm really glad you brought up trust because it's such a deep point, and at a macroeconomic level across countries, there's just enormous evidence that high trust societies do much better at almost everything, and especially something like this where most of the time you don't have all the skills yet, right? I mean, you need to learn it, so you have to have confidence. I wanted to pull out two elements of that trust equation, kind of at opposite ends of the spectrum. One thing you said is that workers, black workers, like people without bachelor's degrees who've had the door slammed in their face, not even slammed, they've been screened out, not even sort of told why they couldn't get the job, they don't get any feedback, they don't learn anything from that. Oh, what could I do differently? You have no idea because you've just been screened out, which is a very, by the way, the definition of a broken market. If you don't learn anything when you don't succeed, the market's not working. But one aspect of trust, I think it's so important, this is something 110 has done that I think is really kudos to 110, is to send out the message that we want you, from employers. We want you, we're looking for you. So Opportunity at Work worked with the state of Maryland and Governor Larry Hogan to remove, Maryland's got 38,000 jobs, remove thousands, bachelor's degree screens from thousands of those jobs. But they didn't just remove the screens, they talked about we want you. So we have a platform that is sort of a signaling platform for stars and employers who want to get them. Maryland put hundreds of those jobs on StellaWorks, our platform, and they sent out the message. And I was there. I launched this program with Governor Hogan, and we talked about 1.3 million stars in Maryland, the other skilled workforce in Maryland that's been overlooked. That it's in a positive way. This is, and people heard it very differently than they had heard these programs before. And I thought it was the right way to do it. It massively exceeded our expectations, and it was the trust factor. People were like, oh wait, you want me? I've literally never heard that before, and people came out of the woodwork to doing it. So I think that's important. But then at the other end of the spectrum, to give Tracy her due, in a big, complex system, 330 million people, not everyone's going to trust everybody, and you may have noticed we're not exactly overflowing in trust right now. Well, that's part of what, but that's part of what financing, when it's done right, this underwriting does. I think the thing you should realize is that, employers need to trust, like credentials and things like that. That's credentials literally from trust, right? That's what the word means. And that's a very important way to spread trust more generally. But honestly, really listen to what Tracy said before, because she's absolutely right. We have devised a system where all of the risk goes on to the individual. They are an N of one. They can't do predictive analytics. They don't have any, right? They end up one place or another. Whereas we can underwrite these things. This is known technology. And so I really applaud what Google and social finance and Merit America Europe, I think that's a really, really important innovation. But there are many of these, it does boil down to trust. So there's individual trust. There's a trust of reaching out and reaching across lines. And then there's a trust of these systems of trust. And then finally, there's actually doing this work. I think this is work we can do in a way that builds trust in the country, because this is a barrier to black and brown workers, but I'll tell you, it's a barrier to rural workers of all backgrounds, and it's a barrier to veterans, and this is something that when I go around the country in communities, lots of different colors, lots of different backgrounds, I hear the same thing. I know what I can do, but no one will give me a chance. And solving this problem is itself a way to build trust by doing real work together that benefits all of us.
Anybody else want
Let me add, look, right now, the federal government is considering expanding the Pell Grant, right? That's something that should be done today. And by the way, it should also include online and off. and so that's for short-term courses, right? We're talking about building skills. We're talking about people being able to afford it. Allowing the Pell Grant to cover it is a very, very equitable policy that the government has been deliberating over far too long, right? This is an easy one. And to build on Byron's comment, look, the federal government is the largest employer in the country.
That's right.
Right? So they can become skills first. Right? And so one thing that the federal government can act, or those two things in particular in my mind, are what they can do: pass the legislation allowing Pell Grant to cover short-term courses, and become a skills first employer yourself.
One last thought. In general, as we talk about both private and public here, there's an alignment of incentives. And I think there are a lot of policies, ones that date back to the 70s, that I think we can take a look at. Are they really incentivizing the behavior in the private sector that we're after? We provide massive incentives in the system for research and development. Almost all of our capital in this country is now in our people, but the incentives to invest in your people aren't there. And actually, in some cases, they're actually disincentives for companies to invest in new skills. So for the policy wonks out there, like IRS 127 versus 129, there are incentives today that say if you're giving people skills for the job they have today, then there's no tax consequence to the worker. If you're skilling somebody for a job for the future that they don't have today, up to a certain amount is then taxable either to the employee, which gets back to our problem on access. If I'm making $20,000 a year, I can't take an implied tax hit of $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, or you're making more expensive for the employer to gross up that on top. So like easy IRS type regulations to just fundamentally get at the point, are we incentivizing the private sector to invest? Another one to think
I thought you were going to go, Greg, with how the incentives aren't working for companies to invest in the human capital, because if you have a capital expenditure, you can depreciate it over 12 years, 20 years. But if it's a human investment, you got to expense it in that year. So it's
So if anyone
layers.
out there wants to spend time with FASB, the Accounting Standards Board, that would be a good use of your time. I've been trying to convince someone to do it, but somebody who knows what they're doing ought to
efforts,
do it.
which is great.
Well, it's
accounting innovation, they call it.
Yeah. The tax code is one thing, but it's riding on top of an accounting system that is treating people as an expense and treating capital as like the most precious investment, and that's backwards, basically.
Absolutely. So as we reach the point for about to wrap up here, I have one last question, and I'd like, if I could, each of you to answer it in 20, 30 seconds. But some of our audience members are in the trenches of their own battle for talent. What one piece of advice would you give to them to help unlock new pipelines for their company? Start with you, Wendy?
Sure. I think I would say don't overanalyze it. Go for progress over perfection, and absolutely don't go it alone, right? Here's even 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people who are committed to this space and ready to help, and quite frankly, make the job easier. This is an opportunity not to go it alone.
Yeah, building on Wendy's point, I would say you've all got champions in your institutions that are there whack-a-moling like the 11 pocket vetoes and going, no, seriously, it's so much work that, like, we work with companies, but we work with the champions of those companies, and they are really, I mean, they're going above and beyond to make this happen. So I'd say, number one, support those champions, back them up, ask what they need, help remove the barriers, but then, for heaven's sake, build the systems that don't require all of your champions to be nights and weekends heroes, because they've got families, they've got other jobs. No, really, I mean, and because you cannot win this battle through champions alone. You need to fix the systems so that regular people doing the best job they can deliver on inclusion. Right now, inclusive hiring is 10, 20 times harder than exclusionary hiring, which we just call hiring. Exclusionary hiring is business process, SaaS enabled, all the rest of it, and we need to make inclusive hiring just as easy. And to the government point, we maybe need to make exclusionary hiring just a little bit harder.
I think our greatest challenge is about changing mindset and changing norms. It's not that we can't come up with the economic rationale, that we can't come up with the technical solutions, right? It's really about changing how this computer works up here. And what I gleaned from the pandemic, and maybe this is the silver lining, is that norms can be changed overnight. We just started communicating with one another, working with one another in entirely new ways overnight. And so that gives me hope that we can change mindsets coming out of this.
Outstanding. Thanks, Tracy. I was thinking about what both Steve and Kent said earlier, that this all works best when it's not an altruistic endeavor, that you are finding a win-win for both a corporation and the employee. And so to what Tracy is saying about switching mindsets, I think historically there has been a view that it is a zero-sum game, that if I'm doing something great for the worker on skilling, it must sit in my CSR department. I think people in this room can really challenge that notion, that from the HR department to impact to the CEO, that there is a skilling imperative, and finding a way to make it both good for your business and your workers is the only way to make this sustainable in the long run.
Two things. One, you should join the 110 Coalition. Right? Let me just focus on this. So we looked in May of last year at the organizations in our coalition, and our goal is hire, promote, advance 1 million black talent who don't have 4-year degrees into family-sustaining jobs over the next 10 years. We discovered that 50 of the companies already had within them over 850,000 black folks working. Retention and advancement is where companies really have a huge opportunity to improve their brand internally and externally. Invest in folks getting promoted, in folks having allies, folks having sponsors. Remove these barriers that are keeping black talent in 65% of the frontline jobs in these companies. That's a huge opportunity, and these folks, they're already in the family.
Thank you for that, Maurice. Well, first, let me thank all of our panelists here today. I want to thank all of you, Wendy, Byron, Tracy, Greg, Maurice. Thank you all so much for the great feedback. And just a couple takeaways from our panel today is we wanted to make sure that we were able to share what works, what's working well, and call summit participants to action for equitable economic mobility. We hopefully demonstrate the role that business plays in enabling equitable and economic mobility and influence they have on access to opportunity for all people who do not have college degrees. And then lastly, just really showcase how collaborations between industry, education, providers, nonprofits, and government create solutions for talent and businesses who need them. So with that, folks, we appreciate your time. I want to thank all of you in the audience and also all of you who are viewing this virtually. Thank you so much. We appreciate it. And I'll call Jack up next. Thank you.
Well done, as always.
So Painter's going to be the moderator. And then Seth is going to be... All right, so we just had another great panel, and as Tracy foreshadowed, we're going to start talking about the public sector. So first, I'm honored to announce Seth Harris, Deputy Director of the White House National Economic Council and Deputy Assistant to the President for Labor and Economy. Seth. All right. So Seth was Biden-Harris campaign's principal labor policy and member of the Labor Department transition team. He was acting Secretary of Labor for Deputy Secretary 2009 to 2014, and he served in, now I don't know if this is right, you don't look old enough, Clinton and Obama's administration, both of them, okay. He's an attorney, business advisor, visiting professor at Cornell Institute for Public Affairs, and he's an author and writes op-eds, and welcome, Seth.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. They made me take the label off, which screws up my endorsement deal. I'm really so delighted to be with you, and so grateful to Steve and Ken for, let's be honest, assembling the people from whom I've stolen most of my best. So this is the ideal time to talk. This is an economy that's built for workers to advance. It's the strongest labor market of my adult life, and despite Jack's very generous joke, my adult life has lasted a good long time now. Workforce development should be about helping workers to advance as far as they can go, right? To be as productive and as successful as their efforts are going to allow, and to be professionally satisfied. Oh, am I not? Uh-oh. I might have to start. Do I need to start again? No? Okay. Well, the people at home are going to miss those fantastic opening jokes. That's what we just learned. So workforce development should be about helping workers to advance, to be as successful as they possibly can, right? To be able to be professionally satisfied, to be able to live middle-class lives. The prospects for workers' success didn't look so good about a year and a half ago, right? The economy was shrinking. Millions were unemployed. Employers were creating only 50,000 jobs per month on average. And experts were projecting a long, very slow, very painful recovery. Last year, under President Biden, the economy grew by 5.4%, the fastest rate in almost 40 years, far faster than the rest of the world's economies grew. The economy is creating an average of 500,000 jobs per month. During the Biden presidency, 438,000 in last month. The unemployment rate now sits at 3.6%. It has been below 4% since December. Layoffs have fallen to their lowest recorded level. Incomes are rising, most importantly, for the people who earn below a median income. And unlike too many past recoveries, this prosperity has been broadly shared. Black and Hispanic workers' employment is recovering at faster rates than during the previous 3 economic recoveries, and women and men's employment opportunities are rising at the same rate. Our labor market is so strong that there are 11.5 million job openings at the end of March. That's a new all-time high. And 4.5 million workers quit their jobs. They quit their jobs. In the overwhelming majority of cases, they did that to take better, higher quality jobs. Workers now have power in the labor market, and they're voting with their feet, leaving low-wage, dead-end jobs behind to find jobs that promise an improved today and a more hopeful tomorrow. Let me say, that's not a flaw in the economy. That's the design. Now, employers have to compete for workers rather than workers scrambling to take any job that they find. The burden is on employers to offer opportunities for training and career pathways, or they're going to get stuck with lots and lots of unfilled jobs. Even more important, workers without college degrees have the same power as workers with college degrees. Now, let me hasten to add, there's nothing wrong with college. College is good. I went to college. I actually used to be a professor. right? And I currently have one of my children in college. Just ask my bank account. So yes to college access, yes to college affordability, yes to college completion. College should be for those who want and need it, not merely those who can afford it. But some Americans don't need or want college. They can succeed in jobs that will support a middle-class life, especially if they can get the skills training and other supports that they need. In his State of the Union address, President Biden called on employers to look at workers' skills rather than their degrees, skills-based hiring rather than degree-based hiring. Our administration is actually moving in that direction now. Last November, for example, the administration announced it would hire its cybersecurity analysts using a skills-based model. Now, cybersecurity is important, but there are many ways to learn important skills. There's going to be rising pressure to adopt skills-based hiring because of the president's success in passing the bipartisan infrastructure law. The infrastructure law is going to create millions of good quality jobs across the country. Estimates are that only 25% of those jobs are going to require an advanced degree. But many, even most of those jobs are going to require specific trade skills. There's $1.4 billion in the bipartisan infrastructure law, but much of it's dedicated to essential but narrow occupational training, like training to maintain low or zero emission transit vehicles. Extremely important, but actually quite narrow. The infrastructure law also creates opportunities to draw on other funding, both funding within the statute and funding from outside the statute, including set-asides from selected grant programs. But we're going to need states and local governments and community colleges, the public workforce system, and other labor market intermediaries to work closely with local employers and unions to braid various sources of funding to support the necessary skills development. And most important, we're going to need them to foster partnerships between employers that will perform the infrastructure work and training providers like registered apprenticeship programs and community colleges that can provide skills training and the required credentials to the workers who are going to do the jobs. Most of the infrastructure law competitive funding opportunities that are going to come out of the Transportation Department and other agencies in the federal government are going to encourage applicants to partner with registered apprenticeship programs that are closely tied to pre-apprenticeship programs, along with other labor management partnership training programs in their planning. Why are we pushing registered apprenticeships? Really simple. They work. They work really, really well. We need more in more industries. Registered apprenticeship can play an important role in providing opportunities to diverse and disadvantaged communities, left behind communities, if apprenticeship programs are integrated with pre-apprenticeship programs that provide basic skills training. I'm not going to argue that registered apprenticeship is a panacea, it's not. But it is worth examining why registered apprenticeship is so successful so that we can apply the lessons of registered apprenticeship to some of our other training efforts. So let me suggest just 5 of the reasons registered apprenticeships are successful, and let me just say there are people in this room who could give you a much, much, much longer list. I'll just focus on 5. First, workers earn while they learn because registered apprenticeships are employer funded. Apprentices are paid to work while they're studying. Working people need a paycheck to live. I shouldn't have to say that. I frequently have to say that, though. Working people can't take time off from work. They need money to live. They can't afford to just focus on their studies. This model allows workers to focus their time, which is very limited, on learning their craft without having to take on crushing debt loads. Second, registered apprenticeships end up in a job that leads to a career. That's one of the reasons that they have a very good completion rate. There is a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, so workers stay with it. Let me say employers also stay with it. Third, registered apprenticeships are the product of labor management partnerships. Employers engage in customizing the training to fit their needs. Unions make sure their members are treated right and prepared for a successful career. So graduates are job ready, and they work on the job while they have been learning, often with the same group of employers who will employ them when they graduate. Fourth, registered apprenticeships are a better way to learn for many millions of Americans. Learning math and other basic subjects in context in the workplace. The traditional style of learning is not for everyone. Listening to some old guy like me stand in front of a room, lecture, write some, this is going to show you how old I am, write something on a blackboard. Anybody seen a blackboard? With chalk, for goodness sakes, right? And then assign a reading in a textbook. Not everybody can learn that way. Back when I was the Deputy Secretary of Labor, I had a very animated conversation with a community college president who was telling me about why he thought his workforce development students were successful. And he said, the reason is because they are kinesthetic learners. They learn by doing. That's the centerpiece of not just registered apprenticeships, but of other work-based learning models. We put these principles, finally, most important, I can't believe I almost jumped over this, most important, workers in registered apprenticeships have a union and a voice. They have protection from unfair decision-making and an advocate. They have someone bargaining for their wages and their benefits. They have mentors, role models, career guidance. Unions are an important ingredient in the mix. Now, we put these principles to work with a 90-day challenge called the Biden Trucking Action Plan. I know you've all been talking about it all morning. The surge in demand for truckers, because of the significant increase in the demand for goods in our country during the course of the pandemic, combined with a long-standing shortage of drivers due to high turnover and low job quality, exposed a gap in our supply chains. But we work with trucking firms, trade associations, and the Teamsters to expedite the creation of registered apprenticeship programs to support quality paid pathways into the industry. The Labor Department cut down the time it took to launch a registered apprenticeship program in trucking from 8 months to 48 hours for employers that were working with a USDOL certified training intermediary. More than 100 new trucking registered apprenticeship programs have been launched as a result. That's a 60% increase in 90 days. Now, we celebrated, let me just say, by driving some 18-wheelers onto the south lawn of the White House for an event with training providers and with trucking companies and with truckers. We called it the Biden Convoy. So, I'm not in charge of branding in the White House. So, let me sum up by saying, we know what works. We also know that funds are available even if we could always use more. Partnerships can be built or rejuvenated if all the players, especially employers, get in the game and lead with teamwork on the local and regional level as well as nationally. So this is a generational opportunity to rebuild the middle class for all of America's workers with workforce development as a central thread in that narrative. So we're ready to work with you to make that happen, but ultimately, it's the people in this room, the people who are watching from some remote, undisclosed location, who are going to make the difference in assuring that workers have a real shot at helping to rebuild America's middle class. So thank you very much, and I'll take a couple of questions if you'd like. You can clap first if you want. Thanks. I think two questions? One question? I'm going to do two quickly and get yelled at. Yes, ma'am. No, we need a. Oh, I'll come back, I promise.
Thank you so much for that. I work with NPower, and we're a registered apprenticeship program, and we work with a lot of the great partners here. I love that you have a trucking initiative, but we know that there are so many jobs that are needed in tech. Is there anything that's going to happen in that space? Because the tech jobs and tech apprenticeship programs have to compete with all of the other bigger apprenticeship programs. So how is that going to roll out to really upskill technology in this country? I
am the wrong person to ask that question. I appreciate the question, and you're exactly right. because there is no reason at all that a registered apprenticeship has to be overwhelmingly focused in the building and construction trades industry, which is where it is primarily focused now. It's overwhelmingly in that industry, but we see it in manufacturing, we see it in healthcare, now we're seeing it in trucking. The correct people to whom you should address that question is tech companies, because apprenticeship requires tech companies to take the lead and create the kind of model that I was just describing. Unfortunately, the tech industry is an under-organized industry, and so finding a labor management partnership is going to be a challenge, although there are unions that I think would be willing to do it. And I think we're going to see some efforts at expanding apprenticeship associated with the broadband rollout under the infrastructure law, but I think that probably the training models there are not primarily going to be apprenticeship. Okay, really quick, before I get thrown off the stage, hooked off the stage.
Thank you very much. Really inspiring comments. Just a very quick question. We've heard a lot this morning about the move from credentialism, the move from academic degrees towards more kind of skill-based, vocational, technical qualifications. There's a medium-term challenge looking past when this has been talked about before. How do you achieve parity of esteem between an academic degree and a vocational qualification amongst employers, amongst decision makers, amongst people as a whole? It's been talked about before, but how do we kind of take that next step and get that parity of esteem?
I think that's a very important question. I think it is going to be an inductive process, not going to be a top-down process. The way in which we ensure that people view it as an acceptable, even a welcome alternative channel to college is to do it successfully and to have apprenticeships that lead to middle-class jobs that are not just building and construction trades, because that model is proven. I mean, can I just say, no one thinks that in the overwhelming majority of building and construction trades jobs that you need a college degree, and coming out of apprenticeship programs, particularly labor management apprenticeship programs, is viewed as a prestigious thing inside that industry, and it's a sought-after credential. So ultimately what's going to happen is employers will hire people out of apprenticeship programs. It will become, that often stated but rarely defined phrase, industry recognized credential, that we all toss around like it has some really deep meaning, but don't really mean or understand, that will be proven by employers actually hiring people who have the credential. That's the only way we're going to make it an esteem. You and I talked before, and I mentioned that I've had conversations both with the German labor minister of the time, back when I was the acting secretary of labor, who's now the head of the EC, and most recently the Austrian Minister of Digital and the Economy. And they both gave me extended lectures in the style of Europeans about their apprenticeship programs, where it is true that those two pathways are viewed as equivalent because they both lead to good quality middle-class lives. And there's more of a recognition that not everybody should be sitting in a classroom with a book or sitting with some, I can't remember what the Google product is, but I was going to promote a Google product here. Yes. If it's not a book, I mean, who reads a book anymore anyway? That's just not the right style for a lot of workers. And so they have done it, but their systems are decades old. We need to build and get started industry by industry, tech industry, healthcare, manufacturing, others. They're there, but they need to become the rule, not the exception, for workers who haven't graduated from college. So with that, let me say thank you very much. I appreciate your time. I think I'm going to be introducing the next panel, which is our public sector panel. And let me just say, a number of people with whom I work very, very closely every single day, and really, you're in for a treat.
I guess it's afternoon now, right? So good afternoon. My name is Ron Painter, and I get the pleasure of being the CEO for the National Association of Workforce Boards. We represent the nation's over 560 local business-led workforce boards across the U.S. and the territory. I want to first give a shout out to Steve, to Wendy, and to the whole crew at Goodwill. A special shout out to my hometown of Pittsburgh and the Goodwill crew there. Incredible partners in the system. So take that as a thanks. I get the pleasure of hanging out with, I don't want to I always try to figure out, I want to say the people who actually have to make all this work as the assistant secretaries and the specials. So I really appreciate the opportunity to join you. Let me quickly introduce the panel, and then let's get into some discussion. So Michelle Chang was nominated by the president to be the first to serve as the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Policy in Economic Development Administration at the Department of Commerce. And Michelle has I don't want to say a long history, but Michelle has a history on both the public and the private side, and including the nonprofit sector side in working on workforce development issues, and has held posts with Rework America. She has worked in the Obama administration for the Small Business Administration, and then McKinsey, Price Waterhouse, and Hope Street. So Michelle, it's great to be with you. It's great to see you again.
It's great to be here with you all today. Thank you so much.
And I do have to say, this is kind of fun, because this is like hanging out with people that I get to talk to on a regular basis. Paige, it's good to see you. Appreciate you are the strategic advisor around workforce in the Department of Transportation, which I know has to be interesting, filled with, I'm guessing, a department of engineers and road builders and bridge makers, and what is workforce development in that world. Paige has extensive experience in federal and local government. We got to know each other when your earlier stint with the Department of Labor, but also then in working in Seattle on a lot of great issues. So great to have you join us. Angela Hanks, who is and I have to read this because it's really long, right? It's the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary and Acting Assistant Secretary of the Employment and Training Administration at the Department of Labor. And likewise, Angela, a rich background in working at not only workforce issues, but workforce issues across a variety of different settings. And now I know a lot of work on everything the panels have talked about prior, like where is this labor force and what's the state of the labor force? But let me ask this question first, because at the local level, where many of the people who are here today, and certainly people who are tuning in, they do this thing we call braiding the funding. And they try to do that, always looking back, saying, don't those people ever talk to one another? I'm going to start. Michelle, talk about how you see this collaboration, because the three of you are not unfamiliar to one another. So talk about the collaboration and what's that process look like?
Yeah, I'll definitely start. First of all, it is helpful. Many of us know each other from previous lives too, in different worlds, and so that makes a lot of the conversations just so much easier to have, because we have pre-existing relationships to build off of. But I will say, once we first came into this administration, one of the first things I think, particularly us at Department of Commerce and Education and Labor, we quickly realized we were all doing a lot around workforce development and that we needed to coordinate. And so we put together a weekly meeting, which we still have to this day, where we talk about what we have going on with workforce development. How do we get each other's feedback and input on the programs that we're putting together? How do we better collaborate? And also, how do we send a signal externally that our three agencies are committed, and our three secretaries are very committed to working together on workforce development? So that's certainly something that we're doing. And then with folks like Paige too, we have a number of different workforce councils too that we all sit on. And I feel like we're probably all sick of seeing each other because it's the same faces on all of these Zooms all the time. But it's great because it keeps, it takes a number of times of hearing the same things, and then we're starting to figure out ways to be able to better work together. So there's definitely a lot of collaboration happening. I'll just mention one exact example too. at the Economic Development Administration, we launched the Good Jobs Challenge last year, and we really leaned on a lot of the expertise that the Department of Labor had done with their grant programs and how to best design it. And so having these collaborations are so critical for our success as well.
And you got a couple applicants on that Good Jobs Challenge, right?
Just a few. We got 509. Yes.
509. Oh my gosh. Paige, talk about what it looks like for the Department of Transportation. And I know you and I got to talk earlier before we came up here, and it's talking about workforce in the Department of Transportation. What's that like, and what's the collaboration look like?
Yeah, well, it's been very important to have that collaboration, and we went so far with the Department of Labor as to create a MOU between our two agencies, and that really helps to establish that partnership, not just between like me and Angela or Angela's staff, but across the entire department, so that everybody's bought in, right? Everyone knows about it, and we can all work toward it. And that MOU is focused on both the Department of Labor helping us to embed job quality and workforce into our, largely capital construction projects. And then it's also about working with the Department of Labor to align some of their funding and programs to better meet the needs of all the jobs that are coming in the infrastructure sector. So that's a really great partnership with Labor. We also have kind of equivalents of me at some of the other major agencies that are implementing the infrastructure bill, like Energy and EPA, and so there's strong connections there. And then with the Department of Commerce, I think you're going to see a lot more collaboration coming soon, because Commerce has their broadband expansion grants that they'll be putting out, and then we have our grants for installing EV electric vehicle chargers across the country. And the two labor forces kind of overlap, both in terms of electrical knowledge and then also in terms of the laborers, just to kind of like do the basic construction work. So I think there's going to be a lot of collaboration between the two of us on those grants as well.
It's sort of the hidden ingredient, right? Nobody really talks about workforce development around economic development or transportation till suddenly we have something that really, in a generation, we've never had this much money to deal with infrastructure. Now the question becomes, well, who's going to build that bridge? And I will tell you, it is not me. We do not want me out there. Angela, Department of Labor, obviously, you talk to us, we talk about workforce all the time. What's it now look like in terms of the collaboration in the administration?
Yeah, so I think the infrastructure law is a good example for us. So we're not named in the infrastructure law, but we're really committed to helping agencies spend their money. So we've been working with Michelle, with Paige, and some of that is under an umbrella of a new initiative that the Secretary announced back in January called the Good Jobs Initiative. As you heard from Paige and from Michelle, as an administration, we are committed to making sure that people get quality jobs. And so part of this initiative, it focuses on a couple of areas. So one big part of it is direct communication to workers and to employers to make sure that both entities know and understand workers' rights. It's an important part of creating that collaboration between labor and management, and it's something that we think we can help facilitate. A second big part of that is facilitating these types of more formal collaborations between the Department of Labor and other agencies, especially those agencies that are invested in implementing the infrastructure law. That's sort of our first go around in seeing how these partnerships might work. We think we have a lot to offer our colleagues. We might not be the experts in building roads and bridges and broadband, but we do know a thing or two about quality jobs and about equity and building that into our labor market. And so that's really where we think we can play a core role. There's something that our Deputy Secretary says that I think is a really great way of thinking about it, which is that people are the roads and bridges, or workforce development is the roads and bridges that connects people in good jobs. And so that is really our kind of core role in working through infrastructure implementation. But again, I'll just echo what my colleagues have said. We spend a lot of time together, which is really nice and great. I promise we do talk to each other. I think, federal government is a slow-moving ship, so I think our collaborations are continuing to bear fruit, and we'll continue to do that. But we want to make sure that our investments, that our strategies are complementary of one another, and so we're always talking to each other to make sure that happens.
Well, let me again say thanks, because we're not strangers. We've had a lot of conversation back and forth, and really appreciate that. People on the earlier panels talking about the opportunities, and we see there are a lot of opportunities out there. Workers are moving around seeking whatever they think is a better opportunity. That's kind of academic. how are you working at making sure that people who have access to these opportunities? What's that look like? And Angela, I'll let you kick it off.
Yeah, so I think there are a couple of things. So just to take a quick step back, at the Department of Labor, in my agency, the Employment and Training Administration, we fund a couple of big things. So one is the public workforce system, which Ron, I think you know pretty well, right?
I have a fair idea, yes.
So that's about a $3 billion investment in communities across the country to support workforce development and related services, including supportive services to workers to help them get access to training, to employment services, and ultimately to better jobs. In addition to that $3 billion investment, we also have a pot of discretionary funds where we award grants directly to, whether it's groups of employers or nonprofits or community colleges to help advance workforce priorities. And so the way that we have been thinking about both of those sets of investments is how do we advance principles of equity and job quality in this moment where we know employers are really eager and looking for workers and are willing to be competitive when it comes to getting building their workforce and diversifying their workforce. So some of the ways that we've been thinking about that in the discretionary grant front is really embedding principles of equity, of job quality into those grants. So we don't want to just do training for training's sake. We want it to lead to a quality job. We want to implement high road partnerships that bring together labor and management. We want to make sure that diverse populations have access to a grant. So we have a focus, I think, in all of our FOAs this year on historically marginalized communities. And that's something that we're going to keep doing. Again, we have these resources that we have available, and we think we can use them both to get people back into the labor force or into a new job. But as we're doing that, I don't think we've really done our job if we just say this person got a job, right? Like, we know that it's a competitive labor market right now. Getting a job is not enough. We want to make sure that it's a quality job, and we want to make sure that those jobs are being accessed by communities of color, by historically marginalized communities, by people who have not traditionally had access to those good jobs. So that's some of the ways that we're thinking about it, but I think this moment really presents an opportunity for us to really rethink and reshape the way that we do workforce development with those kind of key goals around equity and job quality in mind.
I'm going to take it from probably the easiest connection to that to eventually the hardest. But Michelle, what does that look like for the Department of Commerce? Because again, workforce development is sort of a strange partner with economic development.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really exciting time. I think what we've been really excited about is that there's a much more public recognition lately that workforce development is a critical part of economic development. And our secretary came in, for those of you who may be familiar with her work in Rhode Island, having done a lot of work on workforce development. And I think the biggest thing she really wanted to come in and do was to make sure that we were funding programs that were not what she called train and pray. She really wanted us to make sure that we were training workers in partnership with employers to be able to put them into good quality jobs. And so one of the key things, obviously as a Department of Commerce, that we're really focused on is strong employer leadership and commitment in all the programs that we are going to fund. And so with the Good Jobs Challenge that we launched last year, it's $500 million that we received through the American Rescue Plan. We just saw this unique opportunity to be able to invest in workforce development and not, like everyone's saying, not just to put people in the jobs, but really put them into good quality jobs. So we worked with our colleagues, again, cross-agency collaboration, to develop what we were going to call what is a good quality job. And so you can find it on our website, but we're looking for jobs that have good pay, benefits, but also a strong career pathway. So that's what we really believe, that we want to put folks in a position so that they can succeed and make sure that the employers are at the table to help us figure out what are the skills that they need from their workers, work together with the training providers to develop those programs, and help make them successful once they've been in the workplace as well.
So as part of this, Michelle, encouraging, we'll say it that way, encouraging companies to think more deliberately about if they're expanding or if they're relocating, to more deliberately think about workforce development and workforce policy.
Absolutely, and just another thing too, I think Angela touched on this too, equity is our number one priority too. So it's not just about putting folks into good quality jobs, but really focusing on the underserved populations and communities that we know have been hard hit by this pandemic and helping them get the skills that they need and helping the employers also identify these pools of workers that can be into their workforce.
Paige, probably my own bias, but again, the Department of Transportation, I think roads, bridges, buses, things, like, what does this look like inside the department around trying to more consciously think about accessing opportunity.
Yes, we have a very unique challenge. We have $650 billion from the infrastructure bill to build things and to fix things and for repair. And there's not a lot of dedicated funding for workforce development, even though we know, of course, we need people to do all those, to do that work. And so what we have tried to do is we have tried to, first of all, let me clarify, I think something that not everybody realizes. The Department of Transportation, most of that $650 billion is going to states, cities, transit agencies, port authorities. It is going to transportation entities to then be bid out to private contractors. We are not directly funding projects. I think a lot of people think we're funding projects. We're not really, unless it's on federal lands. So in our competitive grants for cities, states, and other transportation authorities, we are trying to get those project owners, that's what we call them, right, to think about workforce. And we want them to really be doing three main things, which we've put in our grants and the bar that we're holding them to. First, we want them to create good jobs, and that's evidenced by partnerships with unions, and it's also evidenced by registered apprenticeship. Seth was talking about registered apprenticeship. It's a really important type of training where job quality is embedded because there are wage standards, there's a clear wage progression, we know it leads to a career. So we have set a high bar on looking for registered apprenticeship in our grants. And then the third area that we really want to see is this focus on underrepresented populations. And I will say that's not just about training programs for underrepresented populations, because the gap in the infrastructure sector, the gender gap, the racial gap, it's not about skills necessarily, right? A lot of it is about a history of culture and exclusion of certain groups, and we really need to get beyond that proactively. And so some of that's about training programs that reach out to certain communities, but we are also asking project owners to use a tool called local and economic hiring preferences. Very hard to explain, but this is a new it's a new tool that's allowed in the infrastructure law. So previously, states and cities weren't allowed to do this. Now they can do it on any projects they want, and it basically allows them to set a certain % of the project workforce that comes from local areas or from local disadvantaged areas, or even from certain groups of workers, right? They can define economically disadvantaged workers, and then they can preference people who are coming from those groups. And so we really want to see more of that, because that's how we hold the contractors accountable for actually hiring more from underrepresented populations, rather than it just being about skills and training programs that sometimes aren't necessary and aren't really the barrier. Although, of course, we do want to see more pre-apprenticeship programs that are serving women, serving people of color, serving people who have other barriers, like people who have criminal records. So certainly those are the sorts of programs we want to see in these grant applications as well. But I will say it is a challenge to try and get transportation owners to think in this way, and that's where partnerships come in play, and I know we'll talk about that more later.
We will. I want to, Michelle, you brought up equity as a part of this. I know the administration has talked a lot about equity and about economic mobility. Let's get a job and then let's move up from there. What might be some ways that the department is trying to put that into play?
So this will start getting a little bit in the weeds, but I think first and foremost, we made equity an explicit priority for us. So back last year, April 2021, we at the Economic Development Administration re-looked at our investment priorities and made sure they aligned with the Biden and Harris administration, and number one on the list, we made equity the top priority. It sounds like a small thing, but explicitly putting it out there as your top priority does send a message, and it sends a message not only for the external community of what we're prioritizing and what we're funding, but it also sends a message for our internal workforce of how we should be thinking about our work. And so I'll just talk a little bit about how that's played out. It's played out in how we design programs, how we write our notice of funding opportunities, how we design our evaluation criteria, how we design our review panels for our applications. It's all of those things, and also how we communicate our work too. And so it's small things, but I think these are the little things that will start to make incremental changes. And one of the things that we're trying to work on now is, how can we put together some systematic changes so that equity continues to be a priority for our Bureau long after we leave as well.
Yeah, Paige, you had mentioned things like first hire agreements or new hire agreements, community-based, community plans. How are you working at the issue around economic mobility and equity in that intentional way?
Yeah, so in terms of the types of policies and programs we want to see, I would say it's the local hire, pre-apprenticeship programs, and then, ideally, these would be sort of, the applications that would rise to the top of the pile would be those that also include training on fair and safe workplaces that have, policies and procedures to address issues around, harassment that come up. We know that they're improving within the construction and the infrastructure industry more broadly, but there's a long way to go. And especially gender equity, we're not really seeing the improvement that we want to see in the number of women that are in the trades and are in some of these jobs. So that's a real priority for us. We also plan on putting out some best practices of how states and localities are addressing issues of sexual harassment and other barriers, childcare, that keep women out of that workforce.
Yeah, very, very tough issues. Angela, like the department, I think has always talked about who are those underrepresented and how do we reach into communities that have not had access. What are some of the intentional things the department is engaged in right now around economic mobility?
Yeah, so I think there are sort of two dimensions that we're looking at this from. So there's one, the investments that we're making directly, and then there's this whole other bucket of work around how we're making our investments. So this time last year, we hosted a series of listening sessions with community groups, with organizations that are doing work on the ground. And our main question was, how easy or difficult is it to access our grants? As you would imagine, being a big federal agency, they were like, it's pretty hard. And so I think we walked away from those listening sessions with a couple of takeaways and that we're trying to integrate into our grants this cycle, really around how we do our grant making, how we invest in communities, and how we bring new players into the fold. So as an example, on some of our reentry grants that we have going this year, our growth opportunities, which helps justice-involved youth access employment and training programs, this is a funding announcement that we put out this year, and it closed a couple of weeks ago. We're putting out the same funding announcement next year. And so potential applicants will have an entire year versus like the typical like 45 or 60-day timeline to apply and to review and look at those grants. And that was based on feedback that we heard that it's really hard for those smaller community-based organizations to pull together a really comprehensive grant application in 30, 45, 60 days. It's just too difficult. A second thing that we're doing on that front is we're actually extending the application period. We haven't quite gotten up to what EDA has been able to do on Good Jobs Challenge, but we are trying to move away from that really tight 30-day, 45-day to a 60-day, 90-day experience on our applications. And then we're really focusing on partnerships. We want to get those newer applicants in the door. We want our kind of more established grantees to work in community, to work with community-based organizations. So as they're developing apprenticeship programs or pre-apprenticeship programs, they're really reaching into the communities that they want to serve and doing so in a way that offers the types of supports that are needed to make sure that people can access these programs, right? Like we don't want it to be like, we really want underrepresented groups in apprenticeship or pre-apprenticeship, but we're not providing adequate supports like childcare, transportation that people need to do it. We want to make sure that those things are embedded and that we have an understanding of what those needs are. So that how to do grant making, I think, has been really important for us on the mobility front. In addition to some of what my colleagues mentioned about really being intentional about how we're building our investments, using our investments to really, we're a small part of the labor market, I think, collectively, but we have this opportunity to really help reshape in a way that provides more mobility for workers.
Wow, if you lengthen the time, single-handedly, you will reduce coffee consumption and trashy food that we all consumed in trying to write all this in 30 days.
Yeah.
I want to ask a two-part question because I know that you're all involved in a lot of conversation with industry. Seth had mentioned trucking. We're in our conversations with them. It's in some ways a repeat of what you all have talked to them about. But this really is unprecedented investment. What are you looking for from workforce agencies, but more so from employers around how to inform people, how to take advantage of this, like, again, unprecedented public investment. Michelle?
I'll start on the employer piece. Obviously, as a Department of Commerce, this is by far the number one thing that we're looking for when we're looking at projects to fund. Our secretary has been very clear. We're not just looking for leadership from employers or engagement. We're looking for commitments. Commitments to be part of the process, to figure out what are the skills that are needed, to create a strong training program, but above else, commitment to hire is what we're looking for.
And that comes back to the point about intentionality.
Yes.
Make people think about this.
Yes. And so I think that's what we're looking for is we want, like we said in the beginning, we want people to be put into good quality jobs. And so what we need is employers to be able to say, I am going to commit to hire someone and put them into that good quality job on the condition that obviously that they complete this training and have the skills that are needed. But if we don't have that commitment, we can't get that quality job.
Paige, what are the things that you're hearing back from the state departments of transportation, maybe from other players in the industry?
Yeah, well, we definitely need support from employers. I think one of the biggest challenges that employers could address is the lack of pre-apprenticeship programs or other pre-employment training programs that go into apprenticeship, making some investments in those. The pipeline there is spotty, right? Some regions have a lot of great pre-apprenticeship programs and others really don't, and people still get into, especially jobs in the trades, in kind of informal ways that we don't really understand. And when things happen in an informal way, that often disadvantages the most marginalized groups. So we really want to have clear pathways into registered apprenticeship. But I would also say that at this time right now, states, cities, local workforce organizations actually have a more important role to play because, again, we're just now giving money to states and cities and other transportation entities. It's not being bid out yet, right? So there's the private sector will be involved later on, and we will definitely, and they are being involved in formula grants that are being given to states. But for a lot of our competitive grants, what we're really looking for now is for states and cities to take a leadership role in planning for their infrastructure workforce and making sure that the systems exist in their states. And they do need a lot of support because they're not used to thinking about workforce, right? As you've been alluding to, this is not something that is normally part of their day-to-day. And so workforce boards, Goodwill organizations, all the community-based organizations in a region could be really helpful by reaching out to their Department of Transportation or their transit agency and trying to understand what is, and of course we want the transit agencies to reach out first, but share their plans for their projects, share what the workforce needs are going to be, and then work in community to design ways to address that need. That's really the stage that I think we're at. And I would say that making sure that the jobs are good jobs is probably the most important way to make sure we have a workforce, right? I think I heard Seth say this, that we want to be in a competitive labor market where people have to compete for workers. But that does mean that the jobs need to pay well, they need to be safe, they need to offer benefits, because a lot of these infrastructure jobs, it's hard work. And if you can go to McDonald's or a retail store or somewhere else and make about the same amount of money or even a little bit less, it's probably a better deal long run, right? So we really need to make sure that people are stepping up and making sure that the jobs are good jobs, and that's really what's going to help them attract the talent.
It's interesting you mentioned that. I've hung out with some companies who suddenly, I don't want to say suddenly realize, but now what becomes a part of their internal conversation is the fact that they're competing against organizations they never did before. And so they're starting to think about that. What's the value? Why come and work for me? Angelo, you hear from, I know you all hear from employers every day. What is it you want to say to them about how to take advantage of this opportunity and how to engage?
Yeah, so I think the conversation we're having today gives a pretty good signal of where we're headed as an administration when it comes to how we want to make these investments. We want to center equity, we want to make sure good jobs are at the center, and we also want to facilitate the partnerships that'll actually make that happen. And I think that was a great point that Paige made. This is a really important moment right now, right? Like the money is just about to hit the street. This is the moment where we want, mayors or county executives to work with their local employers, with their workforce boards, with their state workforce agencies, with their local unions, and bring those folks into the conversation now to develop those really strong partnerships so that doesn't have to happen right when the money is hitting, right? Like, we want those partnerships to already exist and that collaboration to already exist, and it'll help make, I think, what we're trying to incentivize and support easier to pursue in the long run. So I think this is like, there is this moment where there's a little bit of a lag, right, between when the infrastructure law is passed and when the money actually hits communities, but there's real opportunity in that lag because there is this time to pull together those partnerships. And I think just in general, we see that as a real model for how to move forward, is leveraging these different types of expertise that might exist in communities across the country.
So you and Paige alluded to this, but let me flip it. So the public side, the nonprofits, the CBOs, the FBOs, that are out there. When you're having these conversations with the employers, what are they saying about what support they need? And what are those conversations like, again, the CBOs, FBOs, workforce boards need to be having now?
Yeah, I mean, I think that certainly for workforce boards, for community-based organizations, I mean, they're serving communities. They also want to make sure that their investments, that their programs are demand-driven, right? Like, their goal is to make sure that people get into quality jobs. But in order to be able to do that, and I think, Michelle, this goes to something you said earlier, they really need employers to partner in meaningful ways, right? Like, it can't just be, oh, we're doing this as like a nice side project so we can be good to this community. It really is about thinking about building community, building relationships with those community-based organizations, with the workforce system as a way to both, put people into quality jobs in your companies, but also really create that strong, clear workforce pipeline. And so I think that is the biggest thing, is they're looking for partnership and they're looking for meaningful, sustained partnership. I think resources never hurt too, and certainly we're trying to kick in our part as well. But that's really critical because they, as much as the employers are looking for qualified workers, they are looking to place the workers that they're serving into good jobs.
Paige, you have worked for a mayor, as have I. So it's not just about skill development. It's housing and transportation and you mentioned childcare.
Yes.
So this is really a community kind of engagement.
Yeah, and that's why I was going to say, one of the top needs in my assessment is actually leadership, right? It's staff leadership to take on this sector, whether that's infrastructure or a subsector within infrastructure, and understand what's coming and what do we need to do to make sure we have that workforce, a diverse workforce. And that is going to get into how do we restructure childcare. There's great pilots going on around incentivizing childcare centers to open earlier because trades jobs, start earlier. Or maybe, providing, other sorts of assistance. The other big problem is actually, I know this is sort of ironic for me to say this, but transportation, right? So a lot of, construction sites are outside of the major city areas, or they're not accessible because they're literally on a road. You have to have a car to drive to that site. And a lot of people don't have that. So we really want to see more investment in supportive services. And, as you know, I mean, that is one of the types of expenses for which there is the least amount of funding available, right? That's, funding to help people when there's an emergency with their car breaks down, or they need tools for their job, or, any other sort of emergency expense. And that is really especially important for women and other underrepresented populations. And there's some funding that states can use for this, and we're trying to encourage states to do that, certainly. But it's an area where I think the whole community needs to step in and find solutions.
And actually, on that front, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't mention that the next tranche of ARPA, state and local fiscal relief funds, I think are actually going out next week. This is $350 billion that's going to states and localities that can be used for a variety of things, including support services. And I think we've been really, heartened to see a lot of communities using those funds to support workers as they try to get into better jobs.
Michelle, from the standpoint, again, of the Department of Commerce, economic development, businesses, what are you hearing from them about the kind of support they need out of the community?
So I wanted to build actually a little bit on what Paige was saying. When we were designing this Good Jobs Challenge, what we constantly heard from folks is that you can design the training, you can provide the training, but if you're not providing the wraparound services to support that worker through the training, particularly workers from underserved populations and communities, they're not going to be successful. And so that's one of the things that we really focus on with this program, and that's one of the things that we are really pushing employers to think about is those partnerships with these community-based organizations. What we're looking for in the proposals that we're evaluating right now is not just an understanding of who the populations are that you want to serve in your community that are underserved, but what are the barriers that they currently face to accessing training and making that transition from training to employment. So it could be, like Paige mentioned, it could be childcare, it could be transportation, but there's also a lot of value in things like career coaching and financial literacy training and language support. And so understanding the population you're trying to serve and making sure that you form the right partnerships with organizations in your community to provide those services to those workers so that they can be successful once they get that quality job.
That's kind of radical, isn't it? Not just seeing the buzzword in a grant, but actually seeing, like, do they understand what that means? I know you all have a lot of conversations across the country. Places that jump to your mind right away about you're optimistic about, or they're really far down the road in putting this together. Michelle?
So like I mentioned, equity is a huge priority. So I think we've seen some really great work come out of Colorado. The Colorado Workforce Development Council has a talent equity agenda that is really focused on removing some of these barriers for underserved populations. And of course, I was remiss to say, also in Rhode Island, obviously, they've done amazing work, right?
They
With
do,
that
they really do.
employer leadership and having that employer commitment at the table.
Yeah. Paige, places that jump to your mind that you're really enthused about?
Well, I would highlight Oregon, the state of Oregon. So prior to the infrastructure law passing, states were allowed to use 0.5% of one of their highway grants for workforce development. And Oregon was one of the only states that did that. And that really focused it on getting women and other underrepresented populations into the trades. They've increased their fraction of women that are in the trades, and they've done this primarily through supportive services, right? A lot of it is supportive services, and they've found out that that is critical, and from their surveys and their results, that it's especially critical for women and women of color. So that's a really successful model, and what's great is that since the infrastructure law passed, states can now use all of their highway funding on workforce development. It's not just 0.5%. Now, very few states want to do that because they want to spend their money building bridges and fixing roads. But 1%, let me tell you how much money they're getting. So the average state gets about $1.5 billion a year. This is not over 5 years, a year for their highways and roads. And so a tiny fraction of $1.5 billion would be a lot more than most states have available to spend on workforce. So a little could go a long way, and that is one of our top priorities, is getting states to copy the model of Oregon or other places that are making those investments directly in workforce.
Well, having driven, and I won't name the states that I have driven in, I'm really happy that they're focused on repairing roads as well as workforce. I certainly have to support workforce, but I like to hear that repairing roads. Angela, places that jump to your mind, and
Yes.
I know there are a ton.
Yes, and I am similar to Michelle. I'm not just saying this because this is where our deputy secretary is from, but I do think it's a good model. So I think something that we are really excited about are these models of partnerships across the country that really focus on the collaboration between labor and management to create quality training programs that lead to quality jobs. And I think California is just one example where they've actually been able to invest some state funding in addition to using their WIOA dollars to support these high road training partnership models. And really, I think that the value there, and the reason why I wanted to highlight those in particular, is because they're doing them in all different types of industries. It's not just in kind of the traditional construction or manufacturing. They're also in hospitality and leisure, or warehousing. These occupations that have traditionally been low wage, workers tend to be more exploited in those industries, and they're using this labor management model to actually ensure that the training leads to good, high wage, high quality jobs. And so I think that's something that you can see other models like that. Of course, in many other places, the WRTP is a good example of a construction model that I think has long supported that proliferation across the country. But that's something that we're really excited about, is seeing that co-creation, that co-leadership structure, because it is leading to the types of quality jobs we want to see.
And there's nothing like a little money on the table to generate opportunity for conversations that needed to have happened to make it work. We're almost out of time, and I want to just walk down the panel and give you an opportunity. Michelle, any final thoughts, instructions for the folks that are out there?
I mean, I think one of the things that just pains us is that, like I mentioned, for the Good Job Challenge, we received over 500 applications. We're only going to be able to fund 25 to 50. What we'd hate to see is that the folks that we aren't able to fund don't keep going on. And so I guess I would love to see the community, this broader workforce development community, rally around all these other folks and help them get the resources, the technical assistance that they need, because we need more of these programs. There's clearly demand for it. And so let's all figure out how we can fund and give these programs the resources that they need.
And maybe states will start putting more money out of their general revenue, right? Paige, final thoughts?
Yeah, no, we would love to have more examples of states and cities that are putting in that revenue. Yeah, no, I think that I would just say that one thing to keep in mind is that this infrastructure law is a 5-year funding stream, right? And so we're doing a lot now. It's going to continue on, and that means that we need a pipeline that is not just now or a year from now, but even like almost up to 10 years from now. And one of the things I feel like I'm not able to address well enough is that longer term pipeline that reaches back into secondary and even middle schools, and thinking about how we use that to get more young girls and others into some of these really good paying careers, not just in the trades, but in some of the the engineering jobs, the planning, the design, and that's something that I think that local leaders are going to have to take on, since education, especially at that level, is a really local policy.
Angela, final thoughts.
Yeah, so I think we have this really unique moment right now. I mentioned earlier, for us funding the public workforce system, it's about $3 billion a year, but it's a big country, and often what we hear is that our funding doesn't go far enough. But we have this real moment with the infrastructure law, the American Rescue Plan funds that I mentioned a few minutes ago, where we actually have, I think, the tools and resources that we need to really accelerate in building these pipelines and do it in a way that's sustainable, that supports quality jobs, especially for marginalized communities. And so I am just really excited about that moment. I think, we realize that we are a small part of an ecosystem, but again, I think we have this opportunity right now with the funds that we have available through these various pots to really have an impact on strengthening our labor market so it's stronger for, the next, hopefully we're not in a pandemic again. But I think one thing that was really clear for all of us going into this is that our labor market wasn't as strong as we thought it was when a crisis hit. We want to make it stronger. We want to make it more resilient. And we really have an opportunity to do that now.
Michelle, Paige, Angela, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to work with the three of you. Please. And again, I will say my thanks to the good folks at Goodwill for the opportunity to be with you all today. So I want to thank you. I think I'm turning this back over to you, Steve, right?
Okay,
Yeah.
Do we get down? Okay.
All right.
So you've got us again. We are going to do a quick wrap up before lunch, which is set up in the back of the room. 3 quick things for me, and then over to my partner, Steve. One, thank you to Cara and her family for leading us off and with her inspiring story and reminding us about what this is all about. Second, to all of our panelists, from the NGOs, the corporate leaders, to the government departments and experts, CES Talk, really gave us a sense, I think, of the in-the-weeds work that's going forward to make this possible. It's inspiring to hear about so many individual projects. Now, second, that leads me to my point, the thought about collaboration. We need to figure out how to work together to scale all of this. and to take the piece parts that we have right now, to move from thousands to millions. That's a huge shift. We focus, a lot of the work we do at Google is about scaling up, and it's hard. It's harder than it looks. But we have the right people in the room to do it, to try and bring those ideas to light, to create best practices, to make it safe for other companies and other organizations across the country to dip their toe in the water and to get involved here. And lastly, a lesson we take from Google is lunch can be the most important part of the day. It is the chance to actually collaborate, to brainstorm, to work with each other, to get together with people you know, where you already have trusted relationships, to create new trusted relationships. We just talked about the panel now. So if new ideas come out of that conversation over the course of the next hour, our work is not yet done here, and that could actually be a North Star for future generations of work. So thank you all very much.
Yeah. Wow. We've really had the all-stars here today, and it's been just so exciting to watch. And I'd like to thank Google for hosting all of us in this venue and helping us put this event together. It's been great. Yeah. So I think we've heard a lot of things. I think there are a couple of sort of crystallizing thoughts, which I think we heard today. One size does not fit all in this space. And we see people at a lot of different points in terms of opportunity. We heard about people who are really job ready today but can't get access for a number of reasons, and how we can support them. We also see people that need a level of skills acquisitions, and other people who need a lot more support on that journey. And we have to understand that in all of those places there are opportunity, and making progress in each of those places will help us solve this problem. The second issue is there are a lot of places where we can see opportunity in changes in employer perspectives around whom they hire, how they upskill, in terms of getting greater access to a broader number of people, and ensuring that the supports they need help them get through the process. And I think the third thing really is what Kent said, is there's so much opportunity for us to work together. All of us at Goodwill know the most famous quote of our founder, and I'll paraphrase it, which is basically, we should all be dissatisfied until every person has the opportunity to reach their potential and thrive in life. And so there's really a glass half full here, and an opportunity to fill the glass fully through these collaborations. And I think this is really, when he says be dissatisfied, it doesn't mean despair. I think it really means be hopeful, because something great is out there. And certainly he had a vision for what was possible, and it really transformed opportunities and communities across our country. So thank you for being here. Definitely take Kent's advice. Let's connect here over lunch, and if you're watching online, let's connect virtually. And once again, thank you all for coming.